Welcome back to the Damage Report. A new day, a new week, a new co-host. We're mixing things up. Normally, we start off the week with Francesca Fiorentini, our Fantastic Mondays. It's gonna be a Fantastic Friday instead. So Francesca will be here on Friday. She will be helping me sort through the garbage people of the week. So you can stay tuned for that later on. But we've got a special treat for you. For the first time as co-host of the Damage Report, journalist David Shuster joins us. David, how's it going?
John, great to be with you. I think Francesca's soon gonna realize what a horrible mistake she made to start the week.
Well, we'll have to check in with her and see how she does. But we're very excited to have you on, David. You've been, you've been working with TYT for some time. You produce awesome content. For people who might not have seen it, although I'm sure most have, could you give us a little idea of what you do?
Yeah, so there's this TYT channel called Rebel HQ, and what I do is I do a video, just about a video every day, where I sort of find a topic that sort of I find interesting and provide some clips and sort of show the video, and then offer some analysis of it. Sometimes it's all reporting, sometimes it's a little bit of reporting and analysis. Lately, I've been doing a lot of stuff on police behaving badly to try to underscore the systemic problems we have with police in the United States. So Rebel HQ on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and all the various channels for TYT.
Oh, that's awesome. I love a good beat. Are you finding it difficult to find enough content of cops behaving badly to fill your days? The challenge, there's so much police body camera that is now getting released literally every day. The challenge actually is to try to find the police body camera that's controversial. That sometimes police departments will release it, and obviously you want to try to catch it before it goes viral, so that we can sort of talk about it and frame it ourselves. But sometimes police departments will put very bland descriptions of very controversial traffic stops, and so that seems to be the biggest trick, is wading through all the various videos and keeping track of all the local stories to make sure that we're identifying the right stuff. That's awesome. That's awesome. And a little behind the scenes info. So Dave and I were talking briefly about Michael Schor, who we both know. So Rebel HQ has had several lives. Way back, it was Michael's channel for his show 2020 and some other content that he did. So it's an interesting evolution. Glad to see that you're over there now.
Yeah, and I've been following TYT for a long time. I worked with Cenk way back when he came to MSNBC after I had left, but I worked with him and Michael Schor at Current TV, and then I worked with Michael at Al Jazeera Night 24. And John, I've been following your stuff for a long time, so it is truly an honor to be with you on the Damage Report.
That's awesome. Well, I'm very excited to have you here, and I believe that we've got an awesome, spicy rundown for you. So if you are out there, thank you everybody, regardless of whether you're watching on the members app, linear platforms, Twitch, YouTube, whatever. Are you on Twitter? I don't know, maybe you're watching there. Please hit the like button and share the stream so that people know that we're live as we go through this. And through the course of the next 90 minutes, we're gonna be talking about a bunch. New revelations about some of the behind the scenes goings on with the pandemic response under former President Trump. We've got a little bit better of an idea of maybe what's gonna end up in the infrastructure bill, what some of the red lines for progressive senators might be. The future of the Supreme Court, the eviction moratorium. Is Mike Pence eventually going to be killed by this movement that he seeks to lead? We've got all that and much more. And by the way, if you stick around for our last half hour, we almost never do this on Monday, but we will be giving you, meanwhile, in our news from around the globe. So you've got that to look forward to.
Can I offer one more tease? One more tease.
Of course.
And as you mentioned, we may get to Tucker Carlson. For people who know anything about my career, there was a time in my career about 10 years ago where I actually was friends with Tucker Carlson and substituted for him on his MSNBC show. So I've got some insights into, I think, what is driving Tucker Carlson to do the nonsensical stuff that he's doing now. But we'll talk about it.
That is gonna be fascinating. I can't wait. Okay, well, hopefully you can't wait either, but you're gonna have to because it's a little bit later on. Anyway, along the way, please, if you want to send us messages, comments, tweets, super chat, stuff like that, we'll be responding throughout, seeing what what's going on out there in the audience. So feel free to do that. And with that, David, how do you say we jump at this news?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. We're finding out a little bit more about what was going on behind the scenes in the White House, in the federal government, as the pandemic began to rage across the country. And as seems to always be the case, it's coming about as a result of a book, this time written by some reporters at the Washington Post. So let's jump into some of what they've revealed, while acknowledging that as of today, at least, over 601,000 Americans have died in the pandemic. Well over, I believe, 33 million Americans have been infected by COVID. many hospitalized, many experiencing the long haul COVID that so many are dealing with right now. So all of that is out there. Here is what's been going on. You might recall in the early weeks of the pandemic, we didn't know, is it gonna hit America? If so, how bad? Turned out it had already been here for months, but there were a few cases where we weren't sure if it was gonna be here, and Trump was very focused on the number of infected. And so apparently, in the early days of the pandemic, as White House officials debated whether to bring infected Americans home for care, like for instance from the Diamond Princess cruise ship, that was a big scandal early on, Donald Trump had a plan. His plan to suppress the numbers on US soil was, don't we have an island that we own, he said in the Situation Room. What about Guantanamo? You know, Guantanamo Bay. Seriously, aides were stunned because, you know, and when Trump brought it up a second time, they quickly scuttled the idea, worried about a backlash over quarantining American tourists on the same Caribbean base where the United States holds terrorism suspects. So I think we dodged a bullet there, David. What do you think? Was there some merit to the idea?
Jumpsuits down there, the orange jumpsuits are actually pretty comfortable, and the floppy shoes are retrofitted. But no, I think this goes to show both how ignorant Donald Trump was, not only about how the pandemic spread, and also basic science about why the coronavirus was getting to the proportions that it was, and how just isolating just a couple of tourists wasn't gonna make any difference, but also a fundamental misunderstanding about the Guantanamo Bay. Clearly he had never been there, clearly he hadn't been briefed on what the conditions are like at Guantanamo Bay and why it's impossible for the military to house people who are not combatants at that facility. And the idea that you would be able to use this sort of Navy facility for anything other than what it's being used for now is nonsensical. So it strikes me as really, I mean, unfortunate on so many levels. And again, I mean, sure, there was a time when I guess Donald Trump would say, oh, we've only got 6 cases, or we've only got 12 cases. But the fact of the matter is, anybody who had a basic understanding of science would know, but those are just the ones that have been identified. In order to do, you have to sort of figure out, well, who have those people been in contact with? And then it increases exponentially the number of people that have been exposed and that are likely carrying this thing. And for Donald Trump, again, not to understand the basic science here is just remarkable.
Yeah. And I mean, we had to get used to that day by day during the pandemic. Now you might be wondering, is this his worst idea? I don't know. Dude did want to nuke a hurricane, and he did think a moat stocked with crocodiles on the border was a good idea. So this might not be his worst one, but pretty dreadful. I don't think the American people would have been a fan of it. But anyway, a little bit more. He at one point yelled, "Testing is killing me," in a phone call with Alex Azar back on March 18th. So this is very early. Like that's a couple of days into when TYT had just entered into lockdown. He said, "I'm going to lose the election because of testing. What idiot had the federal government do testing?" Azar responded, "Do you mean Jared?" Because Jared, like a week earlier, had taken control of the federal government's nationwide testing program. So look, we know that in his speeches, Trump became laser focused on slowing down the testing. And there was a lot of back and forth in the media about, is it fair to say that he's slowing it down? Is he just joking about it or whatever? But no, apparently behind the scenes, he somehow really thought that it wasn't the spread of COVID that could endanger his presidency, people getting sick, people dying and all of that. It was just the testing, identifying cases, that if we could just slow that down, then sure, all these people will die, but I guess we won't know about it. And that would somehow be better morally or strategically, pragmatically. I don't know, David, but he really from the very beginning was focused on that.
Well, and John, as you've identified in the past, it is so hard to try to get into the mind of Donald Trump. But if we take this and try to think, okay, what was Donald Trump really thinking? The idea was that he thought, well, as long as the numbers are staying low in terms of what we've identified, well, we can always, I suppose, chalk up the sicknesses, the deaths, the hospitals that are jammed to something else, that maybe it's the flu, or maybe it's a breakout, or maybe it's something that is unrelated to COVID. The idea that he would actually be able to think, for any period of time that, we just have to hide the numbers and everything's gonna be fine for me politically, is such a horrible miscalculation and so ridiculous. I mean, and again, at the time, we needed more testing in order to figure out, okay, who's got this disease, who's got this virus, who doesn't? so that we can contact trace, we can make sure that the right people are being hospitalized, so that we can spread out the pandemic so it's not a crush of people all at the hospital at once, and it gives everybody a chance. But for Donald Trump to think, oh, this is pure politics, all I need to worry about is my election, and let's just keep the numbers down and blame the states or blame something other than coronavirus. I mean, it's beyond like reprehensible. I mean, what was it like for you, John, in terms of, did you go out and get a test or have family members who were getting tests? And how valuable was that information, those insights to you?
Well, look, I have actually never been tested for COVID. My wife and I stayed in our one-room apartment for the first 9-10 months of the pandemic. So I wasn't interacting with anyone. I do have family members. Of course, I lost a family member during COVID. So the people living with them were tested. It was obviously so vital, especially early on, for people to start to get an idea of the scope of this thing, to potentially get them to understand that this is a threat. They do need to worry about it. Thinking that the testing itself is the enemy is so twisted. And we sort of, I guess because it's political analysis, we're trained to just glide past the, as you point out, like moral reprehensibility of this. This is appalling in moral terms for a guy that so many evangelical Christians believe was like mandated by God to become president, that he doesn't give a damn if these people are dying. But just strategically, politically, it seems insane to me. And now bear in mind, even with the testing eventually ramping up, there was a campaign that led to millions and millions of Americans believing that the numbers are fake. So I started the segment, David, by saying 601,000 Americans have died, and that's the official number. There are studies that believe that it's higher, but there's tons of Americans that don't believe it's that high, that think that that is a wild overestimation. Except briefly when talking about Fauci's culpability for something having to do with the lab leak, then it suddenly becomes a real number that he's responsible for. But outside of that, there are a lot of people that don't believe these numbers are real anyway, that hospitals were faking a lot of these deaths.
Well, first of all, I mean, my condolences on your family member who passed. I wasn't aware of that, and I'm sorry to hear it. I remember when our kids' school, right, and in the pandemic, they were sort of shutting things down. And there was a testing effort underway because we needed to know, for our kids' sake and for family members, okay, who in the school has gotten it? Have certain teachers gotten it? Have the kids gotten it? Should those families sort of isolate? Because there still was a time at the beginning of this when a lot of schools wanted to somehow stay open or go to some sort of hybrid or go to sort of remote and then go back into school. And I just can't even imagine, I mean, the anxiety in our family and families that I know over children and over people who have underlying health conditions and wanting to make sure that you can sort of keep that protective bubble. The idea that we wouldn't have any of that information. I mean, I think, with the information that we had, we were able to save some lives across the United States. But I agree. I mean, if Donald Trump had been successful and he had been able to stamp out the testing that was underway, I think you would be looking at, instead of 601,000 deaths, you might be looking at more than 1 million. And that gets to the number that the early scientists projected, that if we did nothing in this country, we were looking at more than 1 million deaths from the coronavirus pandemic. And people can believe whatever they want to believe, but the fact of the matter is there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of families who have suffered incalculably and will forever be horrified by this virus because of inaction, both at the federal level and also at the state and local levels. And to the extent somebody was trying to tamp out testing, I just find it sickening beyond words.
I could not agree more. Let's move to some of the others involved in this. The revelations from the upcoming Washington Post book about the behind the scenes of the pandemic response is a severe indictment of Donald Trump, but not just Donald Trump. There are others that are referenced here. So you have Robert Kadlec, who apparently was at the time HHS emergency preparedness chief, and apparently one of those that Trump wanted to fire, but tried to fire and then got bored briefly and then forgot that he tried to fire. It's amazing, White House. So he was involved in the initial purchase of 600 million masks. He took his plan in late March to Jared Kushner, who apparently exploded in anger, throwing his pen against the wall in frustration when he learned the masks wouldn't arrive until June. He yelled at the HHS emergency preparedness chief, "You effing moron, we'll all be dead by June." And that's obviously amazing. But the thing is, if that indicates that Jared Kushner was really worried about this, then why are we only finding this out in a book, a year plus later? Why was Jared Kushner, who was in charge of virtually everything the government was doing over the last 4 years, why wasn't he more public about this? If he thought that masks were so important, where was that? I never heard Jared Kushner talk about how people need to be wearing masks, we need to be spreading masks and all of that.
That's a great question. And to me, this anecdote seems totally true, right? Because think about Jared Kushner. Some people, when they get mad, they would pound their fists or they'd throw a chair or they'd stomp against the wall. There's little sort of weenie Jared Kushner throwing a pen against the wall, raising his voice and saying, we're all gonna be dead by the, I mean, of course that fits Jared Kushner. And so, yeah, I'm sure he was, I'm sure he was mad and maybe he was trying to say, well, I can't say this publicly because my father-in-law will go crazy if we talk about how much, the problems that exist. But sure, in a meeting where Jared Kushner is responsible for some supply chains and supply lines and trying to make sure that we've got enough masks, enough equipment for him to be told, no, nothing's coming really until June. I could see him, getting mad, and I could also see him getting mad in that very sort of unique Jared Kushner way.
Yeah. I could, and look, I feel for Jared a little bit. Like he was blindsided by this thing because he was busy working very hard and diligently on achieving a peace in the Middle East. So, it's like he's got a lot of irons in the fire, I guess.
Well, anyway, I'm not so charitable to Jared because here's one thing about the COVID. If you remember, John, that he was in charge of, he created this sort of special task force, but none of these people on this task force in the spring of 2020 actually had any experience in government supply chains. They didn't bother to go to the Pentagon. They didn't go to the various government agencies that are used to doing this thing. They just created the best minds that Jared Kushner knew, all these sort of young guys, but they didn't have the right experience. So it was fine that he created this task force, but they actually hurt themselves and hurt all of us by putting people on this task force who had no idea how the federal government worked.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And that was true in a lot of different areas of the federal government during the Trump years, but this was possibly the most damaging instance of that. Now, we also have the chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence, Mark Short, who apparently pushed back against an HHS effort to send free masks to every American household in the response's early days, a step that some public health experts think would have depoliticized mask wearing, but which Short believed would unnecessarily alarm people. Several senior officials also compared masks to, quote, underwear on your face, with one remarking that they look like a training bra. I don't understand people. Has no one in this administration ever sanded a piece of wood, painted a little bit? You wear masks to protect your lungs. That's what you do. It shouldn't be new to these people at 50 years old. The idea that sometimes you might have to wear a mask. Have you ever been scuba diving? You wear a mask to protect yourself. It's not like, oh yeah, I really want to see that sea urchin, but I'd rather drown than put underwear on my face. It's so stupid, and these people were in charge, as you were just alluding to. We are at risk because of their ignorance, vanity, and weakness.
I agree with you, and full disclosure here, I sometimes have this sort of claustrophobia thing with masks. I absolutely hate masks. I hate crowded elevators. I can do scuba diving, but not if the water's sort of too deep. So I get it. I get why people don't want to put this thing on your face and have to, give the okay sign or whatever you do in scuba diving. It's so uncomfortable, and I sweat, and it's terrible. Even now, I'm gonna go inside and go to a restaurant or something. They want everybody to wear masks. I'm like, oh God, but I've been vaccinated. Okay, but you do it, right? Sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do because you're a member of society and you want to protect your family members, your friends, members of your community. And that's, again, if the nation had been rallied to, hey, we're all in this together. We're all gonna have to do something that's gonna be uncomfortable. Or David Shuster, you're gonna have to wear a mask even though you're claustrophobic. Okay, but we're doing this for each other. If that had been the message, imagine how much more successful we might have been and been able to spread out all of this so that the hospitals were not overwhelmed and the death count would be lower. But there was never a point with this administration in which there was sort of a common theme of let's all rally around this together. Let's all join forces and do things that may be a little bit out of our comfort zone in order to save one another. And that's the difference in my view between, say, they call the effort to get the vaccine the moonshot. No, everybody was working together to go to the moon. Everybody was working together in the United States in World War II to defeat the Nazis. We were not all working together to defeat the pandemic. And to me, that is just the worst thing about the record of the Trump administration and all of this.
Yep, and you're right. And it leaves me wondering, can we all work together ever again on any major challenge? If something worse than the pandemic comes, will we be torn apart by Fox News and petty, vain men? I worry about that. Okay, everyone, we do have to take our first break, but we've got so much more coming up after this. We're gonna find out what might be the line some progressive senators won't cross when it comes to the infrastructure bill. We'll have all that and more after this. Okay, everyone, let's see what's going on out there in the audience. First of all, on YouTube, thank you to Rajan Savani for becoming a tier 1 YouTube member, getting access to all those emojis. Appreciate you being there. Also, thank you to Nanette Snowden and Radical Trans Girl for joining at tier 2. At tier 2, you get access to our weekly top 10 list. Sometimes it's about politics, sometimes not. This week, we had a request from a producer to do the top 10 animals. Based on what? We're gonna see. That's one of the political ones, by the way. Anyway, so that's available to our tier 2 members. Thank you to all of you who support us in that way. Over in the super chats, Tamara Law says happy Monday. Happy Monday to you too, Tamara. Amy says David's videos are always engaging and interesting. Love it. Got a fan out there, David.
That's nice.
T Underhill says happy Monday, John and David. Thank you for reading this chat. Like this video. Thank you, T Underhill. And yes, everyone, if you haven't already, please hit the like button. You never know what you're gonna have to do to get the algorithm to show you its favor. People sign up for notifications, they don't get them. Let's see if liking the button helps, or pressing the like button helps at all. Let's see, TechStan says, in the dictionary under newsman is a picture of David. He was born to do it. I like that.
Wow, that's very kind of, I get a lot of things wrong. Like, look, I think I look kind of blue to everybody on screen, so I don't know how to do lighting. The audio in my videos sometimes have been all over the map, as people have pointed out. So I'm not an audio engineer, but you know what? I'm learning, and I appreciate all the enthusiasm everybody's given this.
Nice, it's a good background as well. Yeah, audio is so difficult. I've learned quite a bit about video from doing this stuff at home. Audio, I cannot get it. It is like 10 times more complicated than video. Okay, let's see. Franklin Sharpslicer, who sometimes writes in with bits of poetry, says, remember when journalism was cool? We sought the truth with verification as a rule. Now it's 3 minutes and 5 minutes of adverts, then talking to truth perverts. Thanks to the Dragon Squad, we get real truth, thank God. Thank you, Franklin, that was a fun one. Okay, how are we doing time-wise? Okay. Over on Twitch, I am the Hamburglar, subscribed for 5 months, says your unrelenting coverage makes me feel a little more sane, knowing there are good people in the world who are fighting for our planet's future. Thank you, and I try to bring people on the show who give me that same faith. So thank you, David, for joining that list. K-Chan's subscribed for 11 months and says 11 months with John and best evil big sister Franny. Hope everyone is staying cool during all these heat waves. Thanks, John, for always being your nerdy awesome self. Thank you. Yeah, the heat, I mean, I'm sure it was worse in some parts of the country than it is in LA. In fact, I remember, David, you're in Connecticut. Connecticut has some wicked heat in the summers, by the way, but it was pretty hot. I was putting up insulation. And so when you say that you hate masks, I'm normally okay with them. It was getting to me with the heat and the insulation, wearing a mask and goggles and stuff like that. It was a rough weekend.
Yeah.
How's the heat out in Connecticut right now?
It's pretty bad. I mean, yeah, I didn't realize it would be so hot here in the Northeast. I'm originally from the Midwest, and I thought Washington D.C., where I spent most of my career, was hot and humid. I figured, go to the Northeast and it'll be a little bit cooler. Yeah, for most of the year, but summertime. Luckily, there's a lake not too far away. So.
Oh, nice, awesome. Okay, Alien Sock Puppet subscribed for 9 months. Says first live D&D tabletop last week. Threw a dragon at my conservative friends. Hail Dragon Squad. That's awesome, Alien Sock Puppet. Oh, by the way. This is an early heads up, totally not related to anything. So I'm gonna be going to Gen Con after it was canceled last year thanks to the pandemic. And apparently I will be doing a live D&D game. My friend Satine is like a celebrity dungeon master. So she's gonna be running a campaign. I'm gonna be playing live. So if you go to Gen Con, you can watch a little bit of that if you're into that sort of thing. Thank you also to Brandy Lou, who gifted 5 tier 1 subs. And is rapidly approaching 400 gifted subs. Thank you, Brandy Lou. You are a reliable and awesome ambassador to the channel and to the network. With that said, here we are. Okay, let's jump back into the news and see what's going on out there. We've got this possible bipartisan infrastructure deal, but what is gonna be included and what shouldn't be if it seeks to actually get the 60 votes it might need to pass a filibuster? We've got Bernie Sanders, who's gonna be talking about some of the things that are sort of red lines for him. Before we jump to Bernie though, I wanna ask you, David, I'm sure you've been following the back and forth, the negotiations, or these different groups. Do you think that any of this is gonna happen, or is it is all of that going to fail and we just go to reconciliation and see what can happen there?
That's a great question. It does feel like there's something different about the last couple of days and the number of senators who have joined this sort of bipartisan effort. I think it's now up to 22, 23, 11 Republicans. So it feels like this round of negotiations is a bit different, but I think ultimately there's going to be a snag, whether it's over taxing gasoline or whatever it is. And at a certain point, and I'm an optimist more than a pessimist, I'm optimistic that at a certain point, Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema are going to say, this isn't working. Of course, we're going to have to use, we're going to have to bust the filibuster for this and use reconciliation. But, I've got a lot of people say, oh, Shuster, you're a fool. Manchin and Sinema are the devil incarnate. And, this is just headed for disaster. And I get it. I get why people say that.
We'll see. Well, I don't believe in the devil. I do believe they're awful, but you're not a fool. They are awful though. Anyway, okay, so let's see some of what you were referencing there. So one of the bipartisan deals includes new fees for the purchase of electric vehicles, which is just great in a time of climate change, and raising the gas tax, sort of tying it into inflation to help pay for the bill, rather than raising the corporate tax rate, the tax rates on highest income individuals to not even necessarily where they were when Trump became president, just sort of inching it back up there. No, let's get that out of there. Let's instead tax the EVs, tax gas. So here is what Bernie Sanders has to say about that.
Are you comfortable with a two-step process where you noted this is the 25% of what President Biden asked for? Is it worth it in your mind to take what you can get in a bipartisan way, especially if that's the way you can get Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to get on board a Democrats only bill that may tackle the care economy as you just outlined?
Well, look, as I said, what is in the bipartisan bill in terms of spending is, from what I can see, mostly good. It is roads and bridges, and we need to do that. That is what we are proposing in our legislation, but in much greater numbers. One of the concerns that I do have about the bipartisan bill is how they are going to pay for their proposals, and they're not clear yet. I don't know that they even know yet, but some of the speculation is raising a gas tax, which I don't support, a fee on electric vehicles, privatization of infrastructure. Those are proposals that I would not support.
David, depending on how big of a bipartisan group they put together, how many Republicans they're able to get, I guess it's conceivable that they could afford to lose Bernie Sanders, or maybe if Merkley was to say no for the same reason. It seems increasingly difficult considering how hard it is to get Republicans to sign on to virtually anything. So if they draw this as the line, it's about the funding, we're not gonna do it in this way. How much do you think that damages the bipartisan effort here?
I actually don't think it damages it that much, because if there is this agreement on sort of the nuts and bolts of what's in it, what are we going to spend the money on? The roads and bridges, maybe we're not going to spend so much on high tech stuff, whatever. If there's an agreement on sort of the size of the package and what you're spending on with the roads and bridges, how you pay for things, you can be far more creative. So let's just say, well, maybe to try to appeal to Bernie Sanders, the gas tax maybe is only a penny, or maybe it's a nickel for every 5 gallons or whatever it is. Or maybe instead of the corporate tax rate going from 15 or 18 to 28 or whatever it is the Democrats want, maybe it goes up to 22 or 23. And oh, by the way, maybe you don't pay for part of this. In other words, you just tack it on to the deficit, to the debt, as we would do if this was a war, or as we did with the pandemic and all the expenses related to COVID-19. So there are a lot of different creative ways in terms of figuring out, well, maybe we pay for it this way, or we pay for just part of it and we just tack it up to the debt, and you're able to cobble together enough people. You don't worry the people, the deficit hawks. Maybe you get a few of them who suddenly, well, they'll leave because the deficit's gonna go up, but maybe you are able to keep a couple progressives who see the gas tax is not that draconian. So I just feel like there's more room in terms of negotiating a how you pay for this or don't pay for this. There's a lot of different creative ways they can do it than actually, as long as there's a sort of agreement on the overall size and what this money's gonna be spent on. Again, I think I'm optimistic that they can get there.
Yeah, I think that you're speaking a lot of sense, which makes me think they're probably not gonna take a lot of your advice there. Like, it is one of the weird ironies of American politics that like building a road costs money, but blowing it up's free. It's like on the house, you don't have to pay for it. I don't know why that is. And look, obviously the devil is in the details. What would the raise in the gas tax actually look like? I don't know. And by the way, we've talked about this a couple times over the past week or two, and I've gotten a lot of messages from, I think, good-meaning progressives who are like, well, in a lot of countries, they do raise the gas tax to disincentivize either personal transport vehicle cars, or literally to try to push people away from internal combustion engines to EVs. And let me tell you, I totally get that. And on some level, there's nothing I care more about than trying to fight back against climate change. That said, it is a regressive tax. And in particular, in terms of the framing, when it's being proposed, not just out of the blue, but specifically as a replacement for raising the corporate tax rate, raising the highest marginal tax rate, then that is going to trigger, we all have multiple competing values. Fighting climate change is certainly one of mine. Not sticking it to the working class at literally every opportunity is another one. So it's a difficult situation, and Bernie Sanders, I think, is trying to work through that. Really fast, David. One part that Bernie didn't seem to respond to, but was part of Chuck Todd's question, which was the two-step thing, which is you do this bipartisan thing where maybe they strip away a bunch of the climate change fighting measures, and then you come back to try to do that. I have some anxiety about how that would work or how likely it is. What do you think about the possibility of coming back and doing some of the other non-hardcore physical infrastructure stuff in a second bill?
John, your anxieties are well placed, because if they kick that can down the road, they will not get to it. Maybe they'll have some hearings, maybe they'll have some negotiations, but the only thing that will pass will be the sort of first step. So I think Democrats, progressives have to be very careful about not giving away things under some sort of promise. Oh yeah, we'll circle back to that. Like we'll circle back to climate change. We'll circle back to somehow helping electric vehicles. No, you won't circle back because the Senate has such a difficult time passing anything anyway. So Democrats, Kristen Sinema, Joe Manchin, they should beware, and progressives too. You're gonna get what you're gonna get the first time you pass something. You're not gonna get anything more. If you wanna try to figure out, if you wanna separate and say, well, we're gonna spend $750 billion on this infrastructure, and then we'll circle back to how we pay for it later, that's fine, because I don't care whether all that money gets added to the debt if you don't pass anything in terms of how you pay for it. But in terms of what the money is actually spent on, no, I think Democrats should be very careful, get what you can get right off the bat. Don't give that up. If you want to give up something, give up on the spending side in terms of how you pay for it.
Yeah, no, I think that you're totally right. Like we have such a narrow window. Like, elections are, interminably long in the United States. And at some point we're gonna pass that invisible marker that now we're in the midterms, and goodbye Irene on literally anything being done. Honestly, and Bernie didn't imply that he thinks that that's likely to work here, but one of the few times I've actually been able to speak to him, we interviewed him about the COVID aid bill. And I asked him about this talk about, well, get what you can under Biden now in the early days. And then they're saying they'll do a second COVID aid bill later on. Does he think that's likely? And he said that he thought there was a good chance. I don't even hear that being talked about now. Another, like maybe tying in a little bit of funding to one of the other bills, but there's no push for a big COVID related economic or public health relief bill. Not that I've been seeing anyway.
Yeah, and so smart of you, John, in your show to focus on what Bernie Sanders said at Meet the Press, because I really do think he's something of a weather vane in terms of where the Democrats are and where the red line is. And if Bernie Sanders is saying, no, you better not go with gas taxes, that's a signal that there are others in his mind, I think, as well, that won't go for it. And if Bernie Sanders is saying we're okay with the parameters of a smaller bill and it's gonna pay for largely bridges and tunnels and roads, I think that's also a pretty good weather vane. So there's a lot there to take into consideration in terms of what Bernie Sanders is putting out there. But again, also some warning bells about the things that he's not talking about, such as more COVID relief and more aid.
Yeah. Well, let's test the weather vane hypothesis as we move into an area where Bernie is very much disagreeing with some other progressives. There's been a push on the internet in interviews for Justice Breyer to preemptively retire from the SCOTUS. People are burned by what happened with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They're worried about what might happen if he waits too long to leave. So people have been asked about this. Bernie Sanders was asked about this, and here's what he had to say.
Do you think this pressure campaign is appropriate? And would you like to see him retire now?
No, I will let the judge make his own decision. I'm not gonna tell him what to do.
And that was it, actually. Like, he was just, not only is he not interested in pressuring him, he wasn't really interested, David, in talking about the topic. And bear in mind, we've had Representative Mondaire Jones was saying it's time. AOC was asked about it. She wasn't just like spontaneously giving a speech about it, but she was asked about it, and she said, I would encourage him to. She said I would lean in that direction. Bernie was just not having it. What are your thoughts about this? Should they be pressuring him? Does it have any chance of succeeding?
I don't think it has any chance of succeeding, and here's why. Maybe Bernie Sanders, because of his age, is able to sort of relate a little bit more to people saying you should hang it up. I mean, Justice Breyer is 82, he's gonna be 83 in August. In terms of the calendar, in terms of when he really could pose a danger with, say, let's suppose Republicans take control of the Senate. And even though Joe Biden is president and Mitch McConnell says, all right, Republicans take control of the Senate, and there's no chance we're gonna confirm a replacement for somebody like Breyer. Well, under that calendar, you still have until literally the end of 2022. So my suggestion, and certainly the Supreme Court term, where Justice Breyer has already okayed a couple of big cases in the next term, a big case on abortion, a big case on gun control. Yeah, I could envision a scenario, and I've heard some chatter in legal circles in Washington, D.C., where Justice Breyer has signaled, look, I want one more term in the spring of 2022. 5 or 6 months before the election, yes, I will then resign. 5 or 6 months is plenty of time to propose a new justice, get a justice confirmed, and on the bench before the 2022 election. So yes, I do hope that Justice Breyer gets off the court in time for his replacement to be named before the end of 2022, but I think he's got a little bit more time. And I think backing off, he knows what the stakes are. He knows what happened with Justice Ginsburg being replaced, in the way that she was replaced by Amy Coney Barrett. He gets it, and I know all the chatter, he hears it. But I do think Bernie's got a point about, let's give him a little breathing space. Let's give everybody a little bit of time to figure this out. And let's count on Justice Breyer doing the right thing a year from now, as opposed to having to do it right now.
Yeah, you might be onto something. I think 5 to 6 months probably is enough time, assuming the Democrats maintain control. Obviously, if anything happens, if some senator gets sick and has to resign, is replaced by a Republican.
Well, that is a great point, John, because that's the catch here, right? Let's suppose Justice Breyer is going to assume that Democrats maintain control till the end of 2022 or till the 2022 midterms. But what happens if a senator gets sick and has to leave? And then you have to look at, well, what are the replacement rules? Is there a possibility that a Democratic senator leaves the Senate and gets replaced by a Republican or a special election? Yes, and that is a big danger in this. I don't think it's the ultimate danger, but that is something to consider.
Yeah. So let's throw out a few more opinions on this, and then I have one additional question. So Senator Sheldon Whitehouse recently said that now would be the right time for Breyer to retire, given what Mitch McConnell has said about blocking, any nominee if they take over in 2024 and 2023. I got news for you: if they were in charge today, it'd be over. There'd be no chance. But anyway, White House did say, I don't know that senators trying to tell you what to do makes that decision easier rather than harder. And there was a report in the Boston Globe. Breyer said he was worried about public misperceptions of justices as junior level politicians. This is last April. During a 2-hour lecture at Harvard Law School, he expressed a deep fear that the nation's highest court could lose public trust if its members are seen to be guided by politics. And I get that philosophically, and timing your retirement to benefit one party rather than another is certainly a way that people do that, but it's not a new thing. It's not like if he does it, oh, now that's a thing. That is definitely a thing. Choosing justices is 100% a political process. Has been manipulated by an ever increasing amount of partisanship. Like Mitch McConnell has fundamentally, I think, changed the rules. He can reference the 1880s all he wants. He has set the rules for this going forward. And I think the most important point is the point you made, that regardless of what we think he should do, calling for it probably isn't going to influence the outcome. So maybe there's no point in it anyway. I'm very worried about something happening. And then even if, like let's say that he retires and we have those 5 to 6 months, are we 100% sure that Joe Manchin and Sinema aren't gonna try to use their newfound power, not necessarily to sink it as they are with legislation, but to have a huge amount of influence over who the nominee is gonna be, potentially dragging on the process? I don't know, David, do you worry about that?
Here's the good news in all this, John, that I think there's plenty of room for people who are worried, and I count myself among those who are worried, but I think there's plenty of room for people to say, hey, Justice Breyer on a step down. We did a video about that on Rebel HQ and the dangers. I think it's fine for those videos, for the commentary, for the pressure to be out there. I also think it's fine if Justice Breyer wants to say, hey, I want a little bit more time. I'm going to give this another Supreme Court term and we'll see how things go. Everybody can express what they want. He's a grown man, gonna be 83 years old. He's been on the court a long time. He has seen a lot. I'm sure he can handle the pressure. It may not influence him at all, but that's okay. He can take it. And so I think people should feel free to say what they want.
Okay. Well, if you know the justice, feel free to share this video with him. We'll see what he thinks.
I don't know him, so I can't help you with that. But I'm sure he's aware.
I'm sure somebody watching this must have. Anyway, okay. With that, we are going to take our second break. When we come back, the federal eviction moratorium is, it's just a couple weeks till that thing goes away. So what's potentially at stake? What could potentially be done? We're going to be breaking those things down after this. Okay, everyone, thank you, Amber May Fleming, for becoming a tier 1 YouTube member. Appreciate that so much. Let's see, in the super chat, Grandma Sunshine Dragon says elephants. They are very caring and smart. I sure hope they make the top 10. There have been a few people who've been pushing for elephants. I will consider them. And O'Donnell says, John, Gimpy Dragon here. I wanted to share some love. It's my birthday and I've been really depressed and got broken up with, spending my day with TYT. And O'Donnell, happy birthday. Sorry it's not going as you might have wished, but we're gonna try to give you the best show we can to make it the best birthday it can be. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, happy birthday. Wow. And yes. It's so flattering that you would choose to spend this day with us, and I share with John's best birthday wishes for a great one.
Exactly. Oh, by the way, yesterday was Happy Father's Day. So happy Father's Day, David, to the audience. Happy Father's Day, everyone. I hope that it was a good one. Tamika says, seems like people were more worried about buying up toilet paper than protecting themselves from COVID. That's true. We could have gotten them more interested in masks if we told them that it doubled up as toilet paper, actually, I think. Yeah, that was what everybody's worried about, was getting the toilet paper, not necessarily to protect their health. Anyway, Philip Beasley says, thanks for having David on the show. What is his dragon name? So David, I don't know if you're remotely know what this is about. So our most devoted fans call themselves the Dragon Squad, for reasons that have to do with the Proud Boys and stuff like that. But anyway, what people will often do is they will come up with a dragon name for themselves. So they might be Justice Dragon or Milwaukee Dragon or Jazz Flute Dragon. There's something about themselves. So have that percolate in the back of your brain if you're interested in potentially having a dragon name.
Anyway. Wow, that's great that people come up with these dragon names. I'm trying to think of my kids would probably say something like Smelly Dragon or something like that, because okay. I'll think about that one though. Dragons.
Well, okay. That's the leading contender now, so we're gonna see what happens with that. Anyway, over in the members section, a disembodied hand says McConnell will literally do whatever it takes to stop Biden from confirming a judge to the SCOTUS. I agree. Hopefully, if they maintain at least their 50 spots in the Senate, theoretically there's nothing they can do. We'll see. I love plot twists as much as the next guy. We'll see what happens. Why shouldn't it be an 8-1 Supreme Court someday? Anyway, over in Twitch, Savtem Simcha says, got my Pfizer finally, first one, but yeah, easy peasy. Glad to see it. Please get vaccinated if you haven't already. The numbers have not been going up as fast as they should. Z Huddle gifted a tier 1 sub. Thank you so much. Pickle Hippie subscribed for the 10th month on Prime. Awesome, Pickle Hippie. Thank you. Big J subscribed for 5 months. Says Bezos Books. Thank you, Big J. The Kurd Burglar says, hey, Dragon Daddy, can you give a shout out to my wonderful friend Elise, trying to get her into the Dragon Squad? Elise, thank you for being here and for being a part of us. He's saying he's trying to get you in. No, it's too late. You're already in. Thank you for being a part of this whole thing we're doing. You can't leave now. It's like Scientology. Anyway, Onakazoku said, subscribed for 4 months, says, thanks for bringing it every day, John. Continue to please accept my Bezos bucks. I will. Thank you. Verity Dragon subscribed for 8 months, says good morning, Dragons. Thank you, Verity Dragon. Appreciate that. Let's see. Mark Buggs says, so long since I've been able to watch live. Love it. Thank you. Appreciate that. We have a little bit more time. Mark Buggs subscribed for 7 months. 7 months, yeah, baby. Hi, Dragon Daddy. Thank you, Jesus. Hate Factory subscribed for 3 months. A lot of subscribing going on out there. Appreciate all of you sticking with us. in these middle times between elections. We do appreciate it. More news after this. Okay, everyone, let's jump back into some news. For some time now, there has been a national moratorium on evictions, which has helped stop potentially millions of people from being thrown out of their apartments, thrown out of their homes. Well, that is set to expire on June 30th. It's coming up in just a couple of weeks. Through the course of this last year, more than 7 million homeowners took advantage of the foreclosure moratorium passed as part of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act last spring. This is very big. As of right now, it is believed, and estimates very much vary, that more than 2 million homeowners are behind on their mortgages and risk being forced out of their homes in just a matter of weeks. It's according to Harvard University. Over 10 million US adults, 14% of all the renters in the United States, are still behind on rent, with renters of color and renters with children affected disproportionately. And so, if nothing is done nationally, at least, this could be a massive disaster. Now, bear in mind, some states have eviction moratoriums, foreclosure moratoriums, but that is obviously going to vary depending on what area you live in. Nationally, it's potentially a disaster, and we can't really be too surprised by this because it's not like the debt disappeared. Now, it was very helpful for people to be able to stay in their homes, especially amidst a pandemic. But that stuff was just piling up over that time. So without some sort of massive help, no matter how far you push back the date, it seems like you've got a disaster looming, David. And this is something that people have been talking about from the early days of the pandemic. I'm wondering when we're finally as a nation going to grapple with the fundamental problems.
And that's, look, I was just reading the other day about, was it BlackRock, which is buying up all these various sort of properties and making life very difficult for people who now, can't, by buying up the properties, they're making them more expensive for people who actually do want to buy them. And BlackRock, of course, is going to rent them and is buying up entire communities. And so I think that this is a terrible, terrible time right now to be forcing people to, pony up the money that they owe or be evicted. And I would say, let's kick this can down the road. I don't know, for 5 years, if that's what it takes, if we're not ready as a nation to deal with the structural flaws that involve particularly lower income minorities and women, people who are generally more often going to be renters. If we can't deal with those structural inequalities and problems, then let's just keep kicking this down the road, right? Because they should go hand in hand. If we're ready right now to say, you know what, we're going to deal with the structural flaws and problems involving rent and the aggressive behavior and the egregious behavior by people who own these buildings and on and landlords, then okay, fine. Then maybe we can set a date for when we should end the moratoriums. But until we're willing to tackle one, I don't think we should be tackling the other.
Yeah, and I definitely think the worst option is just at some point it's gone. Have this massive bill that pre-pandemic nobody could have paid for. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the stats of the percentage of Americans that like a $400 surprise bill would economically break them. Well, now some of them are looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So I agree, postponing it at least is very important to allow people to get back on their feet. There's still a lot of people out of work. Hypothetically, the US government could buy up the debt and either pay it down, cancel it, or potentially offer some sort of extremely low interest or no interest way for people to pay it back. That's a possibility. Now, some people might say, well, why would the government buy it up? There's a case to be made that the government is responsible for a lot of this debt. If the government had taken the pandemic more seriously, the economy could have theoretically opened back up. People would have been able to work. They might not be in as much debt if the government hadn't been so fundamentally irresponsible. And I worry that the narrative coming out of this is that it's the people who are irresponsible. We already see all this stuff about people being so lazy that because they're getting the unemployment, they're not going back to work. Like, I'm sure they can identify a few people that applies to. But if there was irresponsibility, it was the government and large sections of the media last year that were truly irresponsible in a way that had a huge cost, both in lives and dollars. But oh, sorry, jump in.
No, I was gonna say, well, even if somebody really wants to believe, and I don't, but even if somebody out there in the audience says, oh no, but people are irresponsible. Well, okay, I seem to remember, I think it was back in 2008, 2009 during the financial crisis, where we identified mega traders on Wall Street who ran up trillions of dollars in terrible deals. We forgave them. The government bailed them all out. So if we're gonna bail out the financial industry and bail out all of those fat cats for their irresponsibility, well, why can't we bail out, the folks on Main Street who are saying, you know what, through no fault of my own, I've gotten something of a hole. Maybe instead of completely bailing them out, maybe we, I don't know, give them, say, pay 10% on every, $100 that you owe and make some sort of good faith gesture. I mean, there are different ways to do this without forcing people to get out of their homes. And I think a little more creativity, a little more empathy towards people would actually go a long way, both in recouping some of this money, but also figuring out some way that we can solve this.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad that you brought up BlackRock and some of these other groups that are buying up so much real estate, because we've really got I feel like the renters and the people with their mortgages are about to be crushed between these two behemoths. So you have these companies that have been buying up all this real estate, and that is causing problems just for people trying to buy right now. But then you have these interests that want to end the moratorium as soon as possible. So why? I mean, you might have landlords that are pushing for it because they want to get paid. Okay, I understand that. But there are some huge organizations that are trying to do this, and think about the effect of that. In theory, it's too early for millions of homeowners. Many of those homeowners will lose their homes. Who will get those homes? Well, potentially some of these massive organizations like BlackRock. So I want to give credit to President Sirota, the Daily Poster, David Sirota, who's been on the show a number of times. He had reporting back in May about some different organizations that have been pushing for the moratorium to be prematurely ended. So throughout the first half of this year, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, the Pacific Legal Foundation, and the New Civil Rights Alliance have been pushing, I love the names for organizations in this country, have been pushing federal courts to strike down the CDC's eviction moratorium. The group has so far won 2 rulings. So here are details on those. In February, the Texas Public Policy Foundation convinced a federal judge in Texas to declare the CDC's eviction moratorium unconstitutional. In March, a federal judge in Ohio sided with the Pacific Legal Foundation, ruling that the CDC exceeded the scope of its authority with its eviction ban. Now, obviously, there are a number of wealthy, interesting groups that fund groups like this. One of those, though, is the Charles Koch Foundation, which between 2017 and 2019 contributed almost $7.7 million to those 3 organizations, according to the foundation's tax returns. And so, it's not just, it's time. They've exceeded their legal authority. There is potentially a huge amount of money to be made in doing whatever's necessary to get people kicked out as soon as possible. I mean, I'm sure they want to recoup the money, but there's also potentially homes on the line here. So I think that's something that people need to bear in mind.
Look, I'm right there with you. I mean, and look, I get the argument that some people have who say, look, I made my, last year when I was, when we were, had an apartment in New York and we had a place in Connecticut and we were having to pay double rent because we just decided to leave, and we stayed up to date on all of our payments. And I get the theory or the feeling that some people have about, well, shouldn't I be rewarded if I do stay up to date? And the fact of the matter is, we're already rewarded. Those of us who have been staying up to date, your credit is better. It's easier to borrow money. It's easier to put down money for a house. There's all sorts of benefits that people already get by paying their rent on time. So this argument that, well, we should just punish these people because they didn't do it. No, you shouldn't punish them. You should try to help them, and you should try to take stock of the fact that if you are one of those lucky people who have been making your payments on time, congratulations, you're doing better than a lot of people.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's like it's applied to this. It's a version of the argument that people make reacting to that we can't cancel student loan debt because I already paid mine off. Yeah, you're totally right. It applies in this case as well. Okay, we only have a few minutes, but really fast, I want to cover this last story, and then after the break, we're gonna have a lot more. Obviously, Mike Pence holds such an interesting position on the right now, narrowly avoiding potentially being strung up on January 6th with an insane mob that attacked the Capitol. Well, now he's being heckled. He was at the Faith and Freedom Coalition Summit, and here's how his speech went.
It is great to be back with so many patriots, dedicated to faith and freedom and the road to the majority. And I want to thank my friend Ralph Reed for those overly generous words. I'm deeply humbled by them. Ralph Reed knows me well enough to know the introduction I prefer is a little bit shorter. I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order, and I am honored to stand before you today.
Stop using that line. God, I'm sick of that line. Anyway, they were yelling traitor at him. Even though he stood loyally by Donald Trump for year after year. He's a crazy right winger. Like, he's totally their people, but he didn't overthrow the election with powers he doesn't have. So David, I'm curious, is there any way that he gets back into the good graces of that party? Or is the dissent being overplayed?
That's such a great question. So first of all, I'm from Indiana. I remember when Mike Pence was governor, my parents would talk about what a terrible governor he was. I thought that he was a terrible vice president, but I would never stand up and say traitor at Mike Pence. I'd be a little bit more respectful. So I think that goes to show just how crazy some of the people in the lunatic far right really are regarding Mike Pence. And I don't think that there's much hope for Mike Pence at this point, because he does carry, whether it's fair or not, he does carry some of that baggage of being seen as, well, he wanted the wheels of democracy to keep rolling, and he was therefore willing to authenticate the election. And there's enough Republicans out there who see that as some sort of betrayal, even though Pence was operating within the Constitution, and I'll give him credit for that. But there are enough Republicans that are out there who consider that to have a certain sort of stink factor. And so I think for somebody like, the Florida governor or somebody else who doesn't have that same sort of burden, DeSantis, for somebody who doesn't have that same sort of burden, I think it's easier in a certain way for them to appeal to the far right fringe, because they don't have to talk about their role during the election, and they can be just as conservative as Mike Pence and not have that baggage weighing him down.
Yeah, you're probably right. And there was one of the straw polls, I think at the Western Conservative Values, whatever. Just a couple days ago, DeSantis actually narrowly beat Trump in approval for running for president in the coming next election. I think you're right. The thing that it bothers me, I wonder if it bothers Mike Pence, is that Donald Trump spent weeks telling people that Mike Pence could save them, and didn't, obviously, because he didn't have the power. He could stop this. He could stop the calls of traitor. He could speak out in support of his vice president, but he's not actually doing that. And I wonder if that bothers Mike Pence after all of his loyalty, that Donald Trump has effectively like washed his hands of Mike Pence. So I don't know what becomes of him. It doesn't seem like he'd pick him to be his VP when he runs again, but I don't know, perhaps we'll all be surprised.
I gotta believe that it does bother Mike Pence, but maybe he's got such a disciplined view of the long view, the long game in all this, that Mike Pence doesn't want to engage in all this. He's just gonna take it in hopes that somehow that keeps him above the fray. But I gotta believe, John, that it gets under his skin. At least I'd hope so.
That is certainly possible. Unfortunately, that is all the time we're gonna have for this first hour. So if you've been watching on the linear platform, thank you very much for that. If you're watching on YouTube, the members app, Twitch, we will have some more stories for you, including Meanwhile In. I did want to let you know that the Twitch pitch final call is done. But if you tune into the Young Turks later on today, they're actually going to announce the semifinalists. So that's gonna be a lot of fun, 6 p.m. Eastern time, 3 p.m. Pacific time to see that announced. Early heads up that Indisputable will of course be coming after the damage report today. So when the show's done, prepare for that, and we'll have more for you after this. Welcome back, everyone, to the Damage Report with me, John Iadarola, and David Shuster for the first time. David, thank you again for joining us. I'm sure you.
John, I'm having a riot. This is awesome.
I've had a lot of fun. You have a lot of experience, and it shows. And I appreciate that. What you might appreciate coming up is a live event, like with people in the same room. It's crazy, but I think it might work. It's the Economic Justice Town Hall that Cenk Uygur is going to be doing with Killer Mike and Senator Nina Turner, coming to a Cincinnati near you. It's coming up in the very near future, June 26th, actually. They're going to be talking about Medicare for all, getting a living wage, other progressive policies, the topic of economic justice. If you want information about that and potentially want to visit, you can go to tyt.com/events. You'll find out more information, and including when tickets will be on sale. So yeah, got that coming. Let me read just a couple quick super chats before we jump back into the news. Seb's Veg Meat says, love that you have David on. I really look forward to seeing his vids on Rebel HQ. He's a great asset for TYT. Look at that, not so bad. Andrew Grew says, just give every household $10K for pandemic pains. That would be great. Let's see. Forbesilla says, why was Rebel Dragon not his one choice? Come on, man. That's true.
I'm not that
HQ
fast.
Dragon.
I'm not that quick.
There you go. And now it's too late. Thank you to Emily Nolfo and JP for becoming tier 1 YouTube members. Appreciate that. Enjoy your egg badges and your emojis. And let's see. Physics Nerd Dragon said, and I don't even know what story this is in reference to. It could be virtually anything. Says there's a fatal flaw in John's logic. He's using it. That's true. This is American politics after all. Gim subscribed for 11 months. Go Gim. Tell me what to put, gifted a tier 1 sub. Thank you very much. Tell me what to put, as always. Consume Shrooms subscribed for 7 months. You just keep watching the show and consuming shrooms. I approve. Thank you for being here. And let's see, over at #TDR Live on Twitter, Dragonborn says, I still don't believe GOP will give this bipartisan bill one vote when the time comes. This is just how they roll. They will burn all the Dems' time, and then, like John said, we'll be in midterms and it's over. Yeah, I do generally say that. Maybe for infrastructure, it's something like this is delivering money to them. It's something they could potentially run on. Maybe this is something that will bust past the lack of progress in the Senate. I don't know, David, is like briefly, is this like, I don't have any faith in Republicans ever giving a vote to a Democrat, but I feel like maybe infrastructure is something that evades that.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something. I mean, infrastructure is usually something that doesn't cut politically either way. It's just sort of neutral. Yeah, you get it done, you get it done. You can campaign on it if you're a Republican and a Democrat, and then people usually decide the election on something else. So yeah, I don't think infrastructure is a poison pill or something that's going to boost anybody. Maybe Biden to a certain extent, but for that reason, yeah. But I also get the argument that Republicans don't want to give Democrats a win of any kind.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, with that, why don't we jump back into the news a little bit before we take a tour around the globe? First, let's talk about Tucker Carlson, everyone's favorite time of the day. Tucker Carlson might have you believe that he's not a big fan of the media. He's previously called them animals and cowards just in April. Says, I just can't overstate how disgusted I am, not simply by the details of the lying of the medium, but disgusted by the emphasis. The media is basically Praetorian Guard for the ruling class. I really hate them for it, I'll be honest. Now, this segment is about how potentially maybe he's feigning a bit of his hatred for the media. Later, we'll go back to focusing on how he's feigning his hatred for the ruling class. But for now, let's focus on the media. And bear in mind, we have with us, David, you know Tucker Carlson, or at least did. I've never met the man, I don't know him. So we have a different perspective in that way. But what we've got here is a lot of people coming out and saying, no, dude loves to gossip with the media, actually. He loves to frame things his way, play stories and things like that. So this is Ben Smith from the New York Times says, Mr. Carlson spends his time when he's not denouncing the liberal media, trading gossip with them. He's the go-to guy for sometimes unflattering stories about Donald J. Trump and for coverage of the internal politics of Fox News, not to mention stories about Mr. Carlson himself. I won't talk here about any off-the-record conversations I may have had with him, but 16 other journalists, none from the Times, it would put my colleagues in a weird position if I asked them, told me on background that he has been, as 3 of them put it, a great source. Michael Wolff called him a primary super secret source. I don't even know what that means, but anyway, so he rails against the media quite often, pitching them as either snitches or stenographers for the status quo, which I largely agree with, but probably not in the same story as he would, and that sort of thing, purveyors of cancel culture and all that. But he seems to like gossiping with them. What are your thoughts?
All right, a couple of things. So yes, I do believe that Tucker Carlson does hate certain members of the media. We all do. We all have people in the media that we think are terrible. We all, whether you're a police officer or a teacher, there are bad apples in every bunch. My relationship with Tucker Carlson goes back a ways. So Tucker Carlson worked at the Arkansas Democrat Gazette newspaper in the early 1990s. I was a television reporter at the ABC affiliate there in the mid 1990s. We shared anecdotes on the 2000 campaign of the John McCain bust. So I got to know him then. He goes to NBC, I went to MSNBC. I would substitute for his show, 2007, 2008. To me, he was always a really nice guy off camera, and even on camera, we would have our disagreements, but he was always respectful. But the one thing that really stood out to me is that when I got in a little bit of trouble with Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton, and it was a long story, Google David Shuster pimped out if you want all the background, but I ended up on the front page of the New York Post. Pimped out reporter gets suspended. And I've been, so here I see my career going up in flames at MSNBC. I'm suspended for 2 weeks. I don't know, my parents are asking me, what is this all about? And there I am on the front page of the New York Post. Tucker Carlson comes up and says, Shuster, this is the best thing that has ever happened to you. This is great. Go out and collect every New York Post you could possibly can. Save them. This is terrific for you, Shuster. And I'm thinking, really? And so, but that to me was his sort of view, the idea that you are the news, that you are the one that everybody is talking about. You now have a reputation as a ball buster, whatever it is. He thought that was awesome. And to me, it got to sort of my overall view of how Tucker has evolved over the last now 12, 13 years. And again, it's been 6 or 7 years since I've actually had a conversation with him. I think this really is a game to him. I think he knows that as long as he's feeding this stuff out to the masses and he's controversial and he's saying crazy things, I don't think he really believes most of the stuff that he's putting out there, but he knows it gets a huge audience. He knows how to play the conservative game better than anybody, as the ratings on Fox News for him show. And so he just keeps feeding it out there. And he does take some umbrage and some frustration with some of the journalists who are lazy or people who are not sort of the more sort of pure. If you're gonna be a journalist, be a pure journalist. If you're gonna be an opinion pundit, be a pundit. And I think he does take some issue with people who cross the line. But again, to me, this is just a game for him, and he's playing it really well. Would I play that game? No, I couldn't pull it off the way he pulls it off, because to me it's inauthentic. But Tucker Carlson has a way of understanding. He embraces that he is the story. He embraces that he is creating this narrative about Republicans and about Democrats, and he loves it. And so that's just my view in terms of how this has all evolved. I think it's dangerous, and I would say that to him if I had my next conversation with him. But to me, that's what's going on.
I think that you're probably right about his motivations, and especially like you can afford to do that when you're independently wealthy and all that. And you don't even need to succeed necessarily, even though he is. Yeah, and by the way, I hate that impulse. The idea that the person delivering the news is the point of the news. I hate that. I've often told the audience that if you find at some point, if you can reflect and say, wow, after watching John on the Damage Report for a long time, I believe that politics is about watching John on the Damage Report, then please leave while you can, because I've ruined you. That's not the point of this. Yeah. But anyway, it definitely does seem like he has changed over time, potentially some politically, but even just like you talked about him being, even on air, he's very respectful. I definitely wouldn't describe him these days as respectful to those he disagrees with. Like, it is a pretty absolute thing.
I do think, yeah, you're right. He has evolved very sharply on that over the last 6 or 7 years, I would say, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that said, we are rapidly running out of time, even with this expanded show, and I want to make sure that we get to all of these stories. So, as soon as I get a heads up from the producer that we're ready to go with this next one, we'll launch into our last segment. How's it looking, Marissa? Okay, I'm gonna read a super chat or two. Oh, we are good? Okay, then let's do it. It's time for news from around the world, and meanwhile in. Meanwhile in Iran, they've got a new leader too. It's happening all over the place. Ibrahim Raisi, a hardline judge, who's currently under US sanctions for human rights abuses, secured a landslide victory on Saturday in Iran's presidential election after a contest marked by voter apathy. Hey, they're just like us, over economic hardships and political restrictions. A little bit of information about Raisi, said to have been part of a so-called death committee, one of 4 judges who oversaw secret death sentences for about 5,000 prisoners in jails near Tehran. It says the location of the mass graves, according to Amnesty International, where the men and women were buried, is being systematically concealed by the Iranian authorities. And as we pointed out, participation in the election was very low at 48.8%, or like standard US participation. More than 70% actually voted back in 2017. So like, the United States is saying there's concerns about the actual fairness of the election. That could be entirely true. I generally don't automatically like accept the US pitch of which elections are legitimate and which are not. I feel like we've gotten it wrong a few times. But that said, David, we've got a new leader in Iran, as Biden is potentially looking to restart some sort of diplomatic relationship there. What do you think about this development? Does that make the job any easier, any harder?
You know what? In some ways, I think it makes it easier because, and regarding the elections and whether it was clean or not, the reality is he is the new leader of Iran. He still has to report to the Grand Ayatollah. So you could argue that the Grand Ayatollah is the one who really sort of controls the presidency. But in any case, the fact that they have decided, whether through democracy or through through voting or through the Grand Ayatollah, that they want a hardliner in place, I think it makes it a little bit more predictable now for the Biden administration, that they understand that there are going to be certain red lines, there are going to be certain issues where the Biden administration is going to have a very difficult time. Ironically, it hasn't stopped some progress being made in Vienna in terms of negotiations with US negotiators and Iranian negotiators over a new sort of nuclear deal. So it may be that there's flexibility on the Iran and the United States re-entering a nuclear deal, but maybe there's no flexibility in terms of how Iran treats its own sort of dissidents, its own people within Iran, or even its sort of funneling of missiles and arms to Hezbollah and others across the Middle East. Maybe there's no stopping it, but at least now the Biden administration has a very clear view on who they're dealing with. And sometimes I think that can make negotiating easier, even if the outcome still remains pretty difficult.
Yeah, and for people who are watching this that are thinking, well, I want to make sure that we have some sort of influence that we can push for, increased concerns for human rights and all of that. Well, we need to have a relationship if we're going to do that. And supposedly Raisi he says he's going to remain committed to the deal. Wants to get the sanctions removed. What's interesting in this case, so that's all good news and expected. I'm a little bit more worried about US-based hardliners when it comes to the future of this deal, because trying to reestablish the status quo diplomatically that we had before Donald Trump, that seems like a reasonable thing to do. But I imagine many Republicans, especially those gearing up for the midterms, those are thinking about potentially running for president, are going to take any attempt to reestablish diplomacy with Iran as unacceptable and attack Biden accordingly. I think that's a pretty safe prediction, correct?
Yeah, and that's a great point too, because you'll see these hardliners in the United States will see, they appointed a conservative hardliner in Iran. So why on earth would the Biden administration want to negotiate with them when look who they've just made their president? And so sure, there'll be people in the United States, the domestic political audience, who will take this and run with it. But I also think though in the long run for the Biden administration, it's not going to change much. The United States is still not going to have any influence over domestic affairs within Iran. They're not going to be able to stop Iran's influence across much of the Middle East. Maybe this gives the Biden administration a little bit more in terms of what they can expect with the nuclear deal. But to your point, I mean, Iran has been a disappointment in terms of the US relationship with Iran has been a disappointment for a long time. And I'm not sure anything really changes here.
Yeah, potentially. Meanwhile, in Japan, the Olympics are coming. Is a new surge of COVID coming too? Well, a member of Uganda's Olympic team tested positive for COVID-19 in Japan after getting the AstraZeneca vaccine and after testing negative at home. It was only upon arrival in Japan that the positive test happened. It's the first detection so far of the virus in any incoming athletes, with 5 weeks still to go before the games. The member was denied entry into the country and was instead sent to a government-run facility, while the rest of the team was able to head to Osaka. So there are a lot of concerns about how the Olympics are going to go. Of course, they were postponed last year thanks to the pandemic. Apparently, and this is actually the focus of one portion of John Oliver's program this week, the situation in terms of deaths is actually worse in Japan now than it was when the games were postponed last year, which is, that's like one of the reasons I wanted to focus on this was, I don't know, I just sort of assumed that Japan would be doing better in this regard, but they're very much not. And this is going to be bringing in a lot of people from around the globe. They've, let's see, they've waived the required 2-week quarantine for international travelers for many Olympic teams. Athletes are gonna still be tested daily, which is good. There's been a lot of protests domestically protests about continuing the games. And bear in mind, as of right now, Japan has only fully vaccinated 6.4% of their population. That is far below, for instance, the United States. And so, I don't know, I really hope that they can manage this. I know that the world wants the Olympics to come back, David, but it does seem like a bad time to be flying people in from around the globe.
I'm with you, and that number 6.8% is just shocking. You would think that Japan would be much higher than that. I'm not sure where to come down on this, John, because I love the Olympics, and I don't want to deny American athletes from around the world the opportunity to go and compete against each other on the international stage in front of all the television cameras and do their thing. But I also get, the people of Japan, they shouldn't have to be subjected to even wider coronavirus and variant spreads because of this. So I don't know where I come down on this. I mean, should the Olympics move forward? I mean, should we wait, John, a couple of weeks? I mean, where do you come down on this?
Well, I mean, obviously they don't care what I think, but yeah, no, I hope that they're at least diligent in the testing. The fact that they detected this case, despite many reasons to believe that it wouldn't be there, is, I think, a good sign. If they're testing every athlete every day, and a lot of the sports are gonna be in very large facilities, if they can keep the crowds down, and by the way, just watch it on TV. You're gonna have a much closer up view of the athletes anyway on TV. So don't go. Wait, it'll be in LA in like 8 years. You can come here, you can stay with me, we'll go to the Olympics, it'll be great. I wanna see the Olympics, I miss the Olympics. I wanna see gymnastics, it's gonna be awesome. I wanna see some fencing and stuff like that. But I just really hope that they can stop athletes from getting sick and that they can really quarantine them from the population at large, because more cases coming in is like the last thing that Japan actually needs. We'll see. Oh, and by the way, one of the things that I learned from John Oliver's segment on this was they can't, like Japan can't actually stop it. Like the contract they have with the IOC is that it's up to the IOC whether it goes forward or not. Isn't that weird? That they can't stop the Olympics from happening?
Wow, that is strange. Yeah. And oh, by the way, so my wife, she keeps saying that she's looking forward to the swimmers and the divers. I don't understand why she's so focused on these guys with these little sort of bikini briefs and Speedos. I don't know why she's so into that. I'll have to talk to her about it, but
anyway. You should, and they should add a little bit more chlorine to those pools just in case situation's rough. Meanwhile, in Brazil, they are still dealing with one of the worst situations with COVID in the world right now. And we talk about this periodically, partially because for some reason, it just doesn't really get covered in the United States how bad it is there. We had this brief period where people acknowledged how bad the situation was in India about a month or two ago. But Brazil is really suffering. Their death toll just passed 500,000, the official death toll. God knows what it actually is. We passed 600,000. In India, where it's also really bad, deaths may range from 600,000 to as many as 4.2 million. We certainly don't know now. We might not know for a long time. But in Brazil, it's really bad. Nearly 18 million people have been infected. They're averaging about 73,000 new cases and 2,000 deaths a day. I believe the last daily reporting was over 2,300 deaths, which is still terrible. Yes, 2,301, I think it was on Saturday. Only about 11% of residents are believed to be fully vaccinated, so they're apparently outdoing Japan, to reference one of our recent stories. And there have been massive protests over the past week about the current state. That hitting the 500,000 dead mark is gonna inspire some people to expect some sort of change. And bear in mind, we've got next year an election coming. We've been talking about that recently. President Jair Bolsonaro has not been good on the pandemic. He called it a little flu, while refusing to follow or promote mask wearing, quarantines, and social distancing, despite having contracted the virus himself. He also encouraged large gatherings and disparaged vaccines. And I swear that paragraph is about Bolsonaro, not about Donald Trump, although every one of those facts is true, basically. Except with Trump, at least, the vaccines he disparaged were non-COVID vaccines. He seems to think you should take the COVID one at least. So, and by the way, in terms of international sporting events, last month they announced that Brazil would be hosting the Copa America soccer tournament after Argentina said it would be too irresponsible to do it. It's worse in Brazil, they're going ahead. This could potentially have some effect, David, on the presidential election next year, but as of right now, at least, they are really suffering when it comes to COVID, and their government just doesn't really seem to care much.
Yeah, I mean, my first reaction is my humanitarian empathy goes to everybody in Brazil, whether you're healthy or whether you're not. I mean, it is a horrible situation. It is terrifying. It was awful to see. I think the long view on all of this is that I think many years from now, people, particularly in political science, international relations, governmental studies, will look back and say, okay, there were several examples where incompetent leadership literally caused hundreds of thousands of people to lose their lives. And we're talking about democracies where there's incompetent leadership, not just Donald Trump in the United States, but Bolsonaro in Brazil. You can literally draw the connection now in both countries between a federal government, a federal response that is inept, that says, no, this isn't my responsibility. Everybody's on their own. Everybody, it's up to you to figure this out. It's up to states or provinces to figure this out. And that has been a disaster. And so there should be no argument about the connection now between competent leadership and how you prevent deaths in a public health crisis. And hopefully that's the lesson that we all take away from this and that generations will take away from this moving forward.
I hope so. It seems like a very small silver lining that at least if you preside over so many dead, you'll lose your job at least. So we'll see if that happens with Bolsonaro. We'll also see if you can potentially get the job back in a couple years with Donald Trump. It seems like in a democracy, these sorts of things should matter, but we're gonna test that internationally over the next few years. That said, David, it has been a pleasure to have you on the program. That was a hell of a 90 minutes of news. Thank you so much.
John, thank you and appreciate everybody at TYT for including me. This has been great, a lot of fun and an honor to be on with you.
Great to have you here. Where can people see more of your content?
Rebel HQ on Facebook, YouTube, also as part of TYT. It's the channel where we put these videos up each day. Go to Rebel HQ and you'll see sort of my take in 3.5 to 4 minutes on some of the news of the day.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. And for those of you watching home, thank you so much for joining us. We got a big week planned for you, some fun guests. It's gonna be awesome, but the day is not over. In just a few minutes, if you head to youtube.com/indisputable TYT, Dr. Rashad Ritchie will be taking over. Gonna be having Gregg Daniel of HBO's True Blood and Insecure guest on the show today. Kenya Evelyn is gonna be the co-host. You got Benji Backer, a conservative host. He has been on a tear debating these conservative hosts. So there's a lot to look forward to. youtube.com/indisputable TYT. For my part, thanks for watching. And until next time, stay safe out there, stay sane out there, and I'll see you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Indisputable. We have a show for you today. Okay, we got a doozy with our I wish a Karen would. You ever ran across a Karen that just believes her job is just more important than anyone else's job? Well, I got parking lot Karen, and I'm gonna bring you parking lot Karen today. Also, in the bullpen, I have a guy who's a mixed bag in the bullpen. That is our infamous debate segment where we go back and forth about particular ideology. Well, this is going to be interesting because this guy actually is pro environmental solutions, and he is a hardcore Republican, holds various leadership positions in the Republican Party. This is going to be quite an interesting bullpen. But before I get there, let me bring your attention to a brother who is a TV, film, theater actor, director, has a remarkable background, and also was part of one of my most favorite shows of all time, True Blood. It was so damn addictive. Ladies and gentlemen, Gregg Daniel. Gregg, what up, homie?
My pleasure. I'm just laughing because you said True Blood, and it was such a gas to be on that show. I didn't get to be a vampire though. I wanted to be a vampire, but they just made me a minister. So what can I say? It was a fun show. I always
wondered. I said, man, what would happen if we have Reverend Vampire? And you know what I thought about? Remember the Eddie Murphy movie where he played a vampire and then had his preaching moment? I said that would be perfect to mimic.
That would be excellent. That would be excellent. Great imagination there. Great imagination, Dr. Richie.
Man, I appreciate you so much being on the show today. Let's talk about. You have some projects coming up, but let's talk about cancel culture, something that has been part of the narrative now for a while, and I think both sides of the political coin blame each other for engaging in too much cancel culture. Tell us your point of view as it relates to cancel culture.
I don't like cancel because somehow cancel is negative. There's something negative that in some cases, and I realize it's difficult on both sides. We're sort of reassessing or reconciling these images that we are used to, or these truths we hold to be sacred, and they're not. I mean, there is a thing about trying to reconcile now. It seems to come on as cancel culture. We're going to cancel it, like Lin Miranda's movie. Well, there are not enough dark-skinned people in it, which there aren't, but it's going to be awkward. Cancel culture is, but it's many times it brings itself to a recognition of things that have stayed for a long, long time, And now that we're reconceiving that, it's hard to give up power. It's hard to give up perceptions. It's hard to be out there saying, okay, I've been thinking this way, but the right way is just, it's hard because people feel something is taking away from them. But I think it's just making us more aware, more sensitized, more sensitive to people. I don't call it cancel culture. It may sometimes go too far to the left. I'll agree. Okay, it feels like, wow, really? But look how much good it has done in terms of bringing to truths people who have been underserved and have been left out of haven't had a seat at the table, a piece of the pie. I think, all in all, when the smoke clears, it's good for our society. I do feel it's good for our society.
I look at people who have been quote unquote canceled, right? And I say, there are individuals who I believe deserve harsh criticism, and then there are others who deserve a lesson.
I agree.
Because I think when you engage, let's take racism for example. There are individuals, I believe racism exists on the spectrum. I believe there are individuals that no matter what you do, they will never be helped. They will never change their mind, and they will always be what's known as hyper-aggressive racist. And then there are others that have implicit racism or the internal racism that they can't even recognize, but given opportunity, they may have an opportunity to transform. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. In fact, there's an unconscious bias. There are those who think who call themselves liberal and will side on the environment and black lives. But however, there's an unconscious bias. There's some things that have been coded to us since we were kids in our society, in our community, or things that are coded. So you may not even, you think you might be liberal, but you may not be. You may not be because it's been comfortable. So yeah, there are unconscious biases that we have, and when you're called on it naturally, you get defensive. You want to put up that shield on that wall saying, no, I'm not that. But take a moment, just take a moment and look at the entirety of it. And yeah, there might be some things there that just like a lot of theaters now, I work in theater a lot of theaters are reconceiving. What is our season going to be like now? Do we have to have 5 white playwrights? Who is on our board of directors now? How do we really get education, diversity, and inclusion? So yeah, I think again, yeah, it's raising consciousness in many, many ways. And there are those who are soft, unconscious bias, but they need to be confronted about it as well. If any change is going to happen, Doctor.
Yeah, very well said. I want to get to your new project, but before I get to that, let me ask you about your longevity in the industry. You've seen everything. You've seen trending things. You've seen how Hollywood has changed its mind, so to speak, as it relates to black actors and actresses. Where are we at right now as it relates to inclusiveness of black and brown media personalities and actors and actresses in your profession?
Well, I'm going to go online. I'm going to go on book and say I think this is the most exciting time that I've been through. I do think so. I see people in positions now in my work that I've never seen before. And when I say people, I mean BIPOC, men, women, LGBTQ. I see people in decision-making positions as well that I've never seen before. Yes, it's awkward, it's slow. However, boards are becoming conscious now. They don't want to be on the wrong side of history. So now there are boards that are saying, how can we be more inclusive in our board? I think it's an amazing, exciting time. I've seen more women directors. I've seen more women filmmakers. It's an exciting time because more are coming through. And I think the events of 2020 with the murder of George Floyd and the pandemic we had has really shed a light on things in ways we never thought possible.
Man, I say something that's really politically incorrect, but people know what I mean when I say it. I say every board, I don't care how many white people you have on your board, you need a Tyrone in the boardroom. Absolutely. And I don't mean Tyrone in the sense it has to be a black male. I mean, you need diversity in that boardroom because that voice of diversity can stop your company from making a mistake like Gucci.
Absolutely. Right? How are you ever going to become sensitized to issues you have no idea of? You've never had to consider because of your privilege, because of your power. You've never had to consider that. You do need a Tyrone to say, whoa. See, that might be, I see what you intend. I see what your intention is, but what you're not being sensitive to is how that might alienate black women or black mothers or black, you don't get that. You have to have that voice, or else you're flying blind. You're flying blind. So yeah, you do need that. In the decision-making positions, you have to have more BIPOC individuals. It's the only way.
Let's talk about your project, 7th and Union. To my understanding, this was shot during the height of lockdown, during the pandemic. So let's talk about the project and talk about how logistically you pulled that off.
Well, it wasn't easy. We were one of the first films that was greenlit to actually shoot during the pandemic. So we had a lot of protocols and procedures, everyone trying to be safe as possible. It was a little, when it comes to art, you risk a little bit, but we weren't risking. We had a COVID officer all the time with us. Beautiful story about a Mexican boxer, a black guy, myself, generations apart, but somehow in each other they can find the strength to go on, to move on in their lives. 2 totally different races, 2 totally different generations. Beautiful movie. It's a boxing movie, but boxing is only the backdrop to what I think is a very unique friendship between a brown brother and a African-American brother.
I've heard this film has a whole lot of heart, brother. Can you attest to that?
It does have a lot of heart. It does. Well, just seeing 2 leads up there who are not Caucasian, just having 2 leads, 2 men relying on each other that's not Caucasian, just reframing that rather than showing them as divisive with each other, showing how they actually find hope in each other. I think that's a beautiful story to tell.
How can we watch it, brother?
It's going to be released. It's already played the Latino Los Angeles International Film Festival, and we expect it to be released next year. I'm not sure exactly when, but look out for 7th and Union. It's a beautiful and fun film.
Love it, man. How can people follow you, my friend, social media and elsewhere?
You can find me at Instagram at official Gregg Daniel. I gotta say Gregg. Don't leave out them G's, y'all. Official Gregg Daniel. Twitter at real Gregg Daniel, and Facebook actor Gregg Daniel. And I love to read things and hear from people. Love to.
Man, it's a pleasure, man. Very proud of your success. Thankful for the intellect you bring to the industry and the thoughtfulness you have about inclusion. Thank you for joining us.
I'm humbled by that. Thank you, Dr. Richey. It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you so much, sir.
All right, we got more on the other side. It's indisputable.
So a lot of progressive office holders are doing something fun. I like fun. They're doing the last 2 years in 2 minutes. Okay, we're gonna try it here. First, I wanna let you guys know about the years before that. Hey, remember we started the Just Democrats here on the Young Turks. It was officially launched on our air, basically by you guys. And then we featured AOC, we featured Cori Bush, and Ro Khanna became the first ever Just Democrat incumbent, all on the Young Turks. Now, the last 2 years have been a spectacular follow-up to that. So let's put the 2 minutes on the clock and do this. Young Turks got to start back in 2002, and I think we've been an important part of the progressive movement ever since. What we mainly do is amplify the progressive voice and candidates out there, and I think we've done a pretty good job. Right now, we're currently #1 most engaged news politics network online, beating CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, all of them. We're #1 in total minutes watched. That means not only the number of people watching, but how long they watch. We just crossed 20 million followers and 500 million monthly views. Now, why? That's because actually the country's progressive. It's 2/3 progressive. And you guys have allowed us to be your voice, and we're incredibly thankful for that. So what did we do with that voice? Well, let's look at 2019. We went all over the country talking to you guys and the candidates. So we were in Miami, we were in Detroit, we were in Houston, and we were in Iowa. In fact, we were all over Iowa. You guys were all over Iowa, and all of the candidates saw you guys. We had wonderful people speaking, like the one and only Nina Turner at our rallies. Bernie Sanders stopped by, Andrew Yang, Elizabeth Warren. We interviewed almost everyone on the campaign trail, with the exception of Biden and Buttigieg. And we held them accountable. We even did a progressive economic pledge, and so many wonderful people signed on to that. Bernie Sanders, Warren, Marianne Williamson, AOC, the entire squad, Justice Democrats, and so many others. Now, on top of all that, we started a show called The Conversation, where we featured so many progressive thinkers, writers, and candidates. And one of the candidates we featured in 2019 was Jamal Bowman. Here comes Jamal Bowman. Then we had an amazing 2020. We hired a climate reporter. Damage Report passed 500,000 subscribers. Young Turks passed 5 million subscribers. We're getting the message out to more and more people. Bernie Sanders comes on in the heat of the primary. He comes on after the election to say what we're gonna do for the future. And then Marie Newman wins. Jamal Bowman wins. Cori Bush wins. And then just when you thought it couldn't get any better, here comes Nina Turner. Hello, somebody. And she's running for Congress, and she comes on the Young Turks first. On election week, we had nearly 2 million hours of viewing. We're #1 destination for progressives. You made all that happen. This is amazing, and thank you for those 2 years. What, I went past 2 minutes? Of course!
Viewers had asked for an interview with the TYT Lizard. Mr. Lizard. Oh, you changed colors today. Nice. I don't even know how you feel about us. Do you even like us?
Well, you guys made me this awesome house, so I'm kind of in your debt. I was found outside on the street, and you gave me a home. Granted, it was a really crappy home for a while, but then through the power of fundraising, I became a person who has a multi-level Trump-style mansion.
You do. By the way, you never looked better, man. Normally, you're just green or just brown, but today you're in mid-lizard, right?
I'm not very smart. I'm a lizard, so I don't know how the science works. I guess this is just my mood. It's not every day that thresholds like this are broken. I'm just so excited. I can't contain my pigmentation.
And now you're showing it off.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never seen the lizard like this before.
Senator Ron Johnson. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this man is the definition of caucasity. Not audacity, but caucasity. If I had the kind of confidence that this man has right now, there's no telling where I would be in life. Senator Ron Johnson out of Wisconsin was the single vote out of all of the US Senate in 2020 to stop Juneteenth from becoming a holiday. And he really was the single vote that prolonged it in 2021. But he decided to just, I don't know, change his mind. Now, the reason why he said he was against Juneteenth becoming a federal holiday was because it just costs too much money. Obviously, we cannot celebrate the freedom of enslaved individuals in this country because it just costs too much money to add that to the federal holiday list. Let me remind you, 47 states, including the District of Columbia, already celebrated and acknowledged Juneteenth. So you're really only adding 3 additional states, by the way. And let me also say this, I get it. We don't send politicians to DC to give us holidays. We send them there to give us policies. But damn it, it's still a good holiday. Now, Ron Johnson, the US senator that opposed it, eventually voted for it reluctantly, decided to show up at a Juneteenth celebration. Well, here's how that went. They said, we don't want you here. They booed him. He walked around the crowd as if he was the guy who made it happen, the guy who promoted it, and the guy who absolutely supported it. He did not support it. Now, remember, this crowd is a very diverse crowd. A lot of individuals coming together to celebrate this remarkable opportunity at coalition building. Well, Senator Ron Johnson comes there. The crowd becomes very irritated with his presence and they start to boo him. Good for them, by the way. Good for them, right? Now, here's what Ron Johnson, according to the HuffPost, said. Johnson was not pleased, complaining to the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel that his reception is, and I quote, not how to heal a nation. He blames them for being aggressive in their booing because he opposed some level of progression for black people in America. I love the fact that Representative David Bowen, and I gotta say this, Representative, this was petty, brother, but I like your style. Here's what Representative Bowen tweeted during this rally. Just in case the news doesn't report it, black residents booed Ron Johnson and ran his hypocritical ass out of Milwaukee. Hashtag Juneteenth 2021 celebration for claiming to support Juneteenth after previously voting against it. Gotta love America's holiday. Signed, Representative David F. Bowen. I gotta get that brother on the show. But before I get that brother on the show, I have with me the remarkable editor for Insider's Voice of Color, Kenya Evelyn, on the program. Kenya, good day, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Okay, this is kind of your neck of the woods right here. We got to talk about first the caucasity of Senator Johnson. I mean, he came strolling through there like he was a superhero, but in fact, he's a supervillain to that crowd. Explain this to me, I don't get it.
Well, I have to shout out the hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Whether it be the Milwaukee Bucks winning their series later on that evening, or it be the welcome, the Brew City welcome they gave Senator Ron Johnson that day, Milwaukee clearly won Juneteenth. But that's neither here nor there. I think what we see happening in Milwaukee, what we saw with the audacity of Ron Johnson, is what happens at the state and local level in terms of politics in Wisconsin all the time. Milwaukee is a convenient tool for people and Juneteenth events, which like David Bowen was saying, a colleague of mine or someone I've interviewed many times, as he's been saying, he's one of those political leaders who's been out there every night with either the People's Revolution calling for racial justice reform or working and walking along with black men who are trying to curb gun violence in the city. These are the leaders who are there every day. Those are the leaders who are there at these Juneteenth festivals and Juneteenth celebrations that Milwaukee has been known for. And so when you have outside leaders who any other time are running counter to the racial progress that these very advocates are championing, and when you're running parallel counter to even the celebration of jubilation that is Juneteenth, it takes a lot of audacity for you to expect to show up and be revered once you arrive, and then admonish those who don't dare acknowledge you as some saving grace or some uniting force on their long existing event.
Let me tell you why I like what happened to Senator Ron Johnson. And you know this, being a member of the black community like I am, we have played this we have been very courteous to politicians who have been adversarial to our policy progress in certain arenas. Let me give an example. The black church. Politicians routinely, Republican and Democrats, they will go into black churches during election time, even though they have represented or misrepresented the black community. But we have considered those opportunities to be sacred. We typically do not give any criticism. We allow them an opportunity to join us, to say what they want to say. I'm just tired of that. So him coming to this Juneteenth event, I think he was under an impression that maybe the crowd obviously would not agree with him on his ideological stance, but they would still be respectful enough not to polarize him in that way. I say polarize on, because we have to stop treating these individuals with kid gloves. I'm not for an insurrectionist type uprising. I'm not a terrorist, nor am I a terrorist supervisor or sympathizer. What I am is an individual who cares enough about policy to boldly say in public places, I disagree with your policy because you are a policymaker, and this is how I disagree with your policy, and I'm well within my constitutional freedom of speech to do it this way.
Absolutely, we're seeing the continuation of accountability that came from racial justice protests even last year. And Milwaukee is in a specific position where they can uniquely call out these very legislators. They were inundated by the early outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. Milwaukee was an early hotspot. We saw the economic decline decimate cities across the Midwest disproportionately. And black Milwaukeeans are not unique to that. In fact, the DNC last year, which was supposed to be a symbol or a catalyst for economic recovery, hit black businesses in particular hard when it was canceled last year. And Democrats up and said, okay, well, we'll make it a nice little event at a convention center. And even there was speculation about whether there was anything happening in there. I mean, Milwaukeeans in particular have every more reason to say, what are you doing for our communities? Not just come election time, not just when you need our votes, as Milwaukee, along with Atlanta, along with Philadelphia, as we saw across the country, were instrumental in helping Democrats win certain states. But come back when it's time to talk about jobs. Come back when it's time to talk about the disparities in our educational systems. And that's exactly what folks out there who are challenging Ron Johnson are doing. And it's not just a matter of you are explicitly blocking legislation that would have acknowledged this day federally to begin with, but it's also where are you outside of these instances? The same way that Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in America, where just about any given moment you won't it will be hard pressed, except for along the lakeshore, to find white faces in the city of Milwaukee anyway. Don't parachute into our communities that you usually use the highway to avoid the other 364 days of the year. Don't parachute into them now to feign like bipartisanship or acknowledging our culture and our existence in this state that has long been there. Don't act like that's valuable to you now, when you've been willing to be the obstructionist that kept celebrations like this, celebrations that across the country is not only the largest, but one of the longest outside of Galveston. You didn't care to acknowledge throughout his more than 20-year history. Don't show up now.
Very well said, sister. Very well said. Ron Johnson, even outside of the context of the Juneteenth vote, is antithetical to policy that would help that same community. So they didn't just boo him because of Juneteenth. Those boos also included his policy stance for years on other items as well. Let me shift focus for a minute and talk about Father's Day. I had a great Father's Day weekend. I am a dad. I was able to get in some relaxation. It was cool. But the NRA, I saw this ad from the NRA, the National Rifle Association. They are the de facto lobbying wing for all gun manufacturers. That's what they are. They are not a constitutional rights organization. They are not a gun as a right to own organization. They are in fact a lobbying group. That's who they have devolved into. So over the weekend, in honor of Father's Day, they released a propaganda video. And in this explosive, and I mean that word intentionally, propaganda video, they featured an Arizona father-daughter shooting duo, right? Because this is obviously very, very important to them, with a pretty extreme ending. NRA members, Danny D'Angelo and his 17-year-old daughter, her name is Daniela, are seen firing a variety of guns, including some type of grenade at the end. And listen, I'm no constitutional scholar, but I'm pretty sure the bomb at the end is not included in the US Constitution. But it was the end of this propaganda commercial. Here's some of that. The entire context of this video is about teaching your children to protect themselves from whatever, right? They really don't provide any information other than that. We just need to teach our children to shoot, to kill, to blow things up because they need to get ready for war. War against who exactly? Now this was in Arizona, alarming data about gun violence in Arizona, where this whole gun violence thing or theme came from. Homicide, 2,195. Total number of gun injuries, 2,186. And the list goes on. This is from the Gun Violence Archive, 2014 to 2021, Arizona stats. From 2014 to 2021, there have been 2,195 deaths due to gun violence. If that's not bad enough, more than 20,000 total deaths, with just 600 of them being from self-defensive use. And this is all gun related. We have a gun problem in America where people equate gun and God to the same thing. Kenya, what are your thoughts?
I think it just speaks more to the same pandering, the same propaganda that is reminiscent of the NRA, their association with guns, with violence, with make somebody a man or masculine, which is why we're seeing that perpetuated on Father's Day, because apparently your ability as a parent is defined by your ability to remove the lives of someone else's child using a gun. I'm not quite sure here quite what the logic was, because if we're looking at how parents of other backgrounds are teaching their children to protect themselves, let's have conversations with Black fathers who at an early age have to teach their children how to interact with police officers if they may be pulled over or if they may be stopped with Skittles and an iced tea. We're having conversations from Latinx parents who might have to teach their children what to do if they're stereotyped as undocumented. We're having those conversations. Those are what fathers are doing. Those are what fathers, in terms of being leaders and advocating for protecting their children and protecting their children from the realities of what this country goes through. That is what fatherhood looks like. And so, if we're looking at the NRA, this is nothing more than the same propaganda that makes them puff up their chests and coddle to sensitive, white, fragile feelings that helps them realize that this is what it means to be American. The same way that you can't see an American flag without a Confederate flag or a drag race or Daisy Dukes, our country music. We have this one tunnel vision, and it usually is a means to exclude those who do not fit within that umbrella. But that they're speaking to exactly their audience, those who see Americans as one uniform, or fatherhood or manhood as one uniform ideal. And anyone who does not fit within that, those are the people that they're targeting. That's the who.
The ad says D'Angelo, who's the father in the ad, it says D'Angelo gets an A+ in parenting. That's what the ad says. He gets an A+ in parenting. Now, get the connection here. He gets an A+ in parenting according to this commercial, this propaganda, because he in fact teaches his white female young daughter to use a gun and to blow things up. That is the correlation to good parenting according to the NRA. However, I guarantee you this, if that would have been a black father teaching his black daughter how to shoot, how to blow things up, the narrative would have been that that black father is teaching his kids how to be thugs, teaching his kids how to be gangsters, teaching his kids how to be antithetical to the United States of America. And I promise you, the conservatives will say, this black family, they don't love America. They are anti-American. You gotta understand the context here, because literally you have people that still receive the narrative of being patriots to this country, who say F this country on a regular basis, who say that they are actually learning how to shoot weapons for the reason of coming against the United States government. You have individuals who have already engaged in an insurrection against the United States government, and they still proclaim to be patriots of this country. And they will say that people like myself and people like you are anti-American when they in fact proclaim they are anti-American.
I think the same reason why we even have certain gun laws at the state and local level was in response to fears that Black Panthers were going to arm themselves. The same way we get concerns about gun safety when we're encouraging Black communities to arm themselves. I think we'll have a different discussion on the framing of the vitality, the safetiness of guns and our gun culture the moment that those who do not look like what we associate to be Americans are the dominant culture within it using them. And I think the moment that the NRA is finding themselves similarly to other leagues that have ICE or other organizations, sports leagues, other arenas that have excluded Black communities to their detriment, have excluded communities of color, despite the fact that we will soon be the majority across this country, the more you start seeing them shift that marketing to the very demographics that are going to keep organizations like them afloat while they're now claiming that they need bankruptcy protections, the more you see them beginning to pander to the very communities that will keep their revenue flowing, the more we'll see the conversation around gun safety change. Because the moment we start having those conversations about it being inclusive of anyone outside of the Americans that we envision or those who are their target demographic envision, the moment we'll see the rhetoric around gun reform change.
Yeah, it's actually a simple solution. If you want to see gun laws change immediately, have a mass production of Black people apply for gun licenses. If you do that, I guarantee you these laws will start transforming immediately. Hell, states will call emergency legislative session in order to start changing some of these gun laws. It is still interesting to me that people who are members of the NRA are continually tricked by the propaganda machine, because many of them joined the NRA many years ago because they thought this was a real gun rights organization. But it is no longer that, and it hasn't been that for a very long time. And when you take a poll of the NRA, over 90% of its members, they actually believe in things like universal background checks. They believe that individuals with certain mental health disorders should not have access to weaponry. They believe in these concepts, but even though they are the members and they are dues-paying members, the NRA represents something totally opposite to politicians. Why? Because the members, even though they pay a lot collectively, they don't pay nearly as much as the cats who are gun manufacturers paying the NRA to keep talking.
Now, I won't pretend to be an academic or insult your prowess, but we know the difference between believing something in theory versus practice. So we know that there is an NRA in theory, and we know that there are those who are members of the NRA in theory believing that this is supposed to be something that boosts the credibility of gun owners and boosts the credibility and the integrity of those who choose to be, which they have a right to be, law-abiding gun owners who carry and operate their guns legally and responsibly. But that's the NRA in theory, and we know in practice this is the organization that has pandered to those who care more about profit than integrity, who care more about revenue than credibility. And so if that means that we're willing to lift certain protections so that more guns can get in the hands of those who don't need it or should not even have access. If that means we're ridding ourselves of, background checks, other barriers to get guns out of the hands of those who are dangerous with them. If that means that is hindering our revenue and profits, we're willing to sacrifice our integrity and credibility for that. But thankfully, there are those within the NRA who are starting to wise up to that very propaganda. That the NRA they love in theory is not what they see in practice.
Very well said. We got more on the other side. Indisputable.
Came in late to watch TYT Old School, and I hear Cenk Uygur talking about napkins. Is this the kind of nonsense Anna Kasparian was talking about? Gotta love membership privileges. Gotta love them.
Please have Dave on every 4 episodes or so.
Watching Ben Mankiewicz and Cenk Uygur on Old School talking is exactly like watching Seinfeld and George. I'm not sure if that's a compliment.
Who's on Old School today? Is there one? At Dave Kohler. I hope it's not Brett Ehrlich.
This episode of Old School has killed me. Who knew a conversation about good and bad underwear could be so hilarious and relatable?
Couple things about this video. Dave Kohler looks so badass.
There's more than a 73% chance this Old School will be really funny. Cenk Uygur has been up since 4 a.m., so he's tired. Hence, everything will seem funnier to him. P.S. Remember, food talk, new words, and no or very little politics. I appreciate that all these people enjoy it because I know Cenk loves to do it, and he does it because he knows the fans love it too.
No, it's about more than just making glasses. We're talking about the right to see. Did you know that almost 1 billion people worldwide lack the access to vision correction like glasses? Billion with a B. Wow, that's 15% of the world. This is a real problem. Warby Parker thinks so too. That's why for every pair of glasses sold, they give a pair away to someone in need. Over 5 million pairs and counting so far. Yeah, that's great and all. But there's still a corporation. Is this just another PR distraction for questionable environmental practices? Climate change is what we still need to focus on. That's a great point, but actually Warby Parker is the only carbon neutral eyewear brand in the world. I really think you're burying the lead here. Oh, really? And what is that? These glasses look amazing. You do look really good. Stop. You look good. I don't think it can be overstated. So turn to the left. This other companies they make me feel underserved area.
What is happening here? You guys, we got to go to break.
I'll continue to sit. I'm going to continue to stand with the people that are being oppressed.
The president labeled him a son of a bitch.
I don't think it's good to be a distraction to your team.
To stand proudly for the national anthem.
You know, some of these people need to move to another country.
Well, you shouldn't be playing, you shouldn't be there. Maybe you shouldn't be in the country.
The president is put in place to amplify the racists in this country.
Black men and boys are killed at an exponentially higher rate than white men and boys, as outlined by PBS. Black people are most likely to be killed by police, found mappingpoliceviolence.org. Personally, my biggest gripe is not seeing how sports and politics have been attached at the hip. From the jockey syndrome, to the Negro Leagues, to Tommy Smith and John Carlos, Muhammad Ali, to modern day and everything in between. This is not an escape. It is a reflection of reality and a reflection of the times.
Dog on the White House lawn, would that
Everything that we've accomplished over the years is because of our members who've allowed us to remain independent of corporate interests and reach 20 million followers. Now is the time to bring as many people into the progressive movement as possible. We're inviting you to be the change and help bring a community-powered progressive change machine to life. Details are at tyt.com/change. If you're a member, thank you. We need you to remain so. If you're one of the thousands of viewers out there who's not a member yet, the time has come for you to join now. We need you more than ever. tyt.com/change.
Welcome back to Indisputable. Let me read some of these amazing viewer comments All right, we got a lot of them. Don't forget, make sure you always tune in to Indisputable TYT on the YouTube page, Indisputable TYT. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Indisputable TYT. All right, let's go to the members. Cognitive dissonance is a hell of a drug, says. If that was supposed to be about a father bonding with his child while teaching about gun safety and operation, it lacked any feature of the educating or safety aspect. It was basically a trailer for Taken 6 where the daughter learns her dad's specific set of skills. That's funny, I like that. Diana says, I work in the legal field and we're required to do unconscious bias training twice a year. It's truly eye-opening. We all bring bias to the table we aren't aware of. Agreed. YouTube, Mike B says, if it was a black father-daughter team doing this, the cops would have been called though. Agreed. Non-human humanist says, shouldn't he be at work? After all, he didn't want it to be a holiday. Yeah, why is he not at work? He did not want this holiday. Ron Johnson, Travis Moore says, Ron Johnson trying to be a white savior to a T. Lawrence Wells says, I love watching Dr. R Squared, and I love the fact that you're all watching. The feeling is mutual. All right, Twitch. Gregg Daniel with all the G's is a class act. Yes, that comes from DOTMH. And Robert 1007 says, I need to get fashion advice from Dr. Richie, looking sharp today. Well, take notes, my friend, take notes. Sonic Boom Dragon 23, Kenya, a bunch of hearts and smiley faces. Good stuff. Ghost Dog TV, best host on Twitch, law student, teacher, and oh yeah, he's a dad. After the show, Dr. Richie is gonna stop a bank heist too. I did that last week, my friend. Welcome back. I still have my co-host Kenya. Kenya, I almost feel sorry for Mike Pence. Now, when I say almost, I don't actually mean that. So Mike Pence signed up for a job to be the vice president of what he knew would be the worst president in the history of our nation. He signed up to be vice president to a guy who was bigoted, who was sexist. See, we saw all of this during the campaign. He signed up for the job. He volunteered for the assignment. This did not happen after Trump became president. It was well known before he became president. So now that Mike Pence did not commit a federal offense and tried to overturn the election by not accepting the Electoral College, right? The followers of Trump, because they are a cult, they turned on Mike Pence. Mike Pence has been trying to get his footing, political footing, ever since. Trump did this to him, yes, but in a way, Pence did it to himself. So Pence decided, hey, let me go speak to this conservative, religious, Christian Republican group. By the way, once again, Christian, right? These are the people that are my base. These are the folks that wear the WWJD, what would Jesus do bracelets. I will be safe among my Christian brethren. Well, here's what his Christian brethren had to say about his speech.
And I want to thank my friend Ralph Reed for those overly generous words. I'm deeply humbled by them. And Ralph Reed knows me well enough to know the introduction I prefer is a little bit shorter. I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. And I am honored to stand before you today.
Well, the crowd was saying traitor. So here's how it reads in your bio, sir. You're a traitor, Christian, Republican, whatever else, right? So they are calling him a traitor. And why are they calling him a traitor? Because Pence, who had to be basically rushed out of the Capitol because they were saying, we're going to hang you. Pence did not violate the law by overturning the actual election results. Let me remind you of what they, the same people, were saying about Pence back then. Well, things are looking up for Mike Pence because they're not saying hang Mike Pence anymore. So I'm glad things are looking up for him. They're just saying he's a traitor, which by every definition, it is probably better to be called a traitor than to have a mob of white terrorists looking for you to hang you, okay? Kenya, what is Mike going to do?
I mean, Mike Pence is a perpetual lesson in self-owning. I cannot offer advice for a man who, I mean, in the number of titles and the number of descriptors and adjectives he get, offered for himself, petulant small man might be one of them. I don't know, tomato. But in all actuality, I mean, this is those instances where you made your bed, now you lie in it. And essentially what we know is that Donald Trump forced other Republicans to he drew a line in the sand, and you're either with us or you're against us. And so what Mike Pence is continuing to try to do, as he has done as he did throughout his tenure, and it formed like emphasizing, what he did during his tenure as vice president, when he was vice president, was he tried to play both sides. He tried to look like the calming, reassuring voice for the frantic president. He tried to look at like the alternative to someone who was getting work done behind the scenes, like we knew Dick Cheney to be doing when he was vice president during the Bush administration. He wanted to look like the meat and potatoes, the things that got things done behind the scenes, and at the same time, the calming voice that could bring this country together. And when that line in the sand was drawn, and then we saw with other Republicans, whether it be Marco Rubio or we're seeing it with Matt Gaetz, they've shown their loyalties. Their loyalty is to a former president, knowing that he is still the face of a party. He's still the face that those within that party support, and that anyone who is looking to run or even looking to just keep their name in the hat for 2024 needs to stay on his good side. And where the vice president, former vice president, Mike Pence recognizes that he has to do that at the same time towing a line where this man threatened him. This man had his life on the line during an insurrection. And so while you want to acknowledge that you did your job, you did what you could do, playing the victim is what Mike Pence is really good at doing. You were bound by the Constitution to do your job. So now feel sorry for me that in the process of doing this, I got those to turn against me, but I'm for you. I'm still a Christian. I'm still a Republican. I'm still a conservative. Whatever adjective he wants to throw out there so that he is not taking the blame for being exactly what those Republicans who see that line drawn, showing him and telling him exactly what he is, and that's a traitor.
Yeah, and see, here's the thing. They don't give a damn about those other titles. They don't give a damn about the Republican title. They don't care about the conservative title, because in a cult, only one title matters, and that is your allegiance to the cult leader. And that is what you have seen happen in the progression of what took place after Trump got elected. This is now Trump's party. This is not McConnell's party. This is not the Republican Party. This is Trump's party, and he will continue to shape it as he sees fit until or unless somebody inside of this tribal conflict, somebody stands up to him and is able to compete with him on some level. But right now, he's the guy slapping every Republican around as he wants to. Let me shift gears. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish a Karen would. We go across this country to highlight the detrimental Karens of the world. Well, this Karen, I'm going to call her parking lot Karen. She's obviously a very important person. She's so important that people who are doing work, people who are doing really important work, dealing with gas, that's too much of an inconvenience for this Karen. She was really upset about these workers doing their job. Here it is.
And we got a Karen.
The word is saying, ma'am, you have issues, and she clearly does. I didn't know parking cones were that serious. Obviously, her vehicle does not have the ability, like everybody else's vehicle, to simply drive around the parking cones and go to her destination. She must have a restricted vehicle because these parking cones really made her upset about the work these men were doing. But that's not it. I want you to notice in this next video, the foot stump, because it's time for Karen to take a time out.
You can move these cones too.
Yeah, but we're dealing with gas,
man. You can put your phone down because you know what? You don't do anything anyway. You're a waste of life.
Ma'am, we're working with the gas. We're fine. Ma'am.
Are they okay?
Ma'am, we're working with gas. We're dealing with gas.
Are you okay?
It's in a.
Is everybody okay while you smoke your
Hey, call Julio, fool.
These folks are dealing with gas. This is really important stuff. And they have to section off certain areas to make sure they deal with it safely and appropriately. But that doesn't matter to Karen. Karen called them, and I quote, a waste of life. This Karen also decided to start being aggressive and adversarial to bystanders who were asking the men, are you okay? Are you all okay? And then she taunts them for being reasonable. Fascinating. Kenya?
When you're used to privilege, equality seems like oppression. Similarly, I guess when you're used to coddling, accountability, equal treatment feels like an attack. And so what we're seeing all across the country is right now, those who are used to being able to center themselves, those whose lives and livelihood are able and have been used to having precedent over others, we're seeing the very manifestations of those very uncomfortable realizations that just simply the world doesn't revolve around you.
Yeah. Let me get to another expression of extreme privilege. Now, you and I, Kenya, can agree that what happened on January 6th was in fact an insurrection against the government. It was in fact a terrorist attack against the Capitol. These individuals were domestic terrorists. They utilized criminality and violence in order to make a political point. That is your casebook statutory definition of terrorism. It fits 110%. Now, there are individuals who are being apologists for terrorists. Let's go ahead and call them what they are. They are terrorist sympathizers. That is who they are. Let's go to Fox News host Mark Levin. Mark Levin says January 6 rioters would be treated better if at Guantanamo Bay. In a June 13th episode rebroadcasted on Saturday, Fox News, Mark Levin claimed January 6 suspects are being treated worse than terrorists detained at Guantanamo Bay. Additionally, falsely claiming the charges against them have not been made public, which was a complete lie. Here's some of Levin's commentary.
What has happened exactly to the hundreds of people who were involved on January 6th? Some of whom broke into the Capitol building, some of whom were on the Capitol building steps, some of whom were on the Capitol building grounds. What has happened to them? We're supposed to be a republic. We're supposed to be a free country. We have a constitutional system. We have due process. Take a look at the Constitution. We don't have secret trials in this country. And yet, what has happened to these people? We get little spurts of information here and there from the 2 or 3 independent reporters, none of whom were associated with big media or big tech, who were bothered to look into this. What are we hearing? We're hearing that we have more FBI resources applied to this than to anything else. That people are being rounded up all over the country and being charged in some cases with misdemeanors. We have SWAT teams that are being used to collect people and bring them back to Washington. We're hearing that they're in some of the worst jails and that some of them are being put in solitary confinement where they only have an hour where they can go outside, if that. That they're being fed poor food. They're being treated like they're terrorists, and in Guantanamo Bay, where they'd be treated actually better.
I want to remind you that Mark Levin never defended nonviolent individuals who are black and brown currently in prison under unimaginable circumstances, even though whites who were convicted of the same crime were able to receive probation or take a very fluffy plea deal. He's not concerned about them. He's concerned about the terrorists. The only reason he's concerned about these terrorists is because not only are they white, but they also represent an ideology that he believes in. Kenya, your thoughts?
Kalief Browder served 3 years in prison without ever reaching trial for being accused of stealing a backpack. If we want to talk about the inequalities, if we're talking about the injustices that exist in our criminal justice system, folks who made a conscious decision to storm the grounds of the US Capitol to overthrow the US government in the midst of its transition of power is not one of them. And I know that network isn't typically rooted in fact or reality, but no amount of revisionist history can allow them to erase the lived experiences of a mostly black and brown city of Washington, D.C. that had to experience it. And knowing that I'm only 2 miles away from that Capitol, remembering what that felt for communities of color, black communities in the DC area, to have helicopters over your house, to have the streets completely martial law in your own community, in your own street. For those who came from rural America or came from all over America because they feel as though those of us who look like me, those of us who look like you are taking over. You cannot erase those experiences, and no amount of revisionist history is going to negate that. It also doesn't negate that the data is showing us that there were far more police presence at Black Lives Matter protests throughout the year in 2020. What we saw at racial justice protests all across the country. And if we're really making a direct comparison to Guantanamo, we're looking at years of organized abuse, years of organized torture that received global condemnation to the point that currently the current president of the United States, the very administration that the former and that those who congregated and joined up and tried to take over the US Capitol were trying to disrupt, they are now trying and adamantly trying to finally close that base. If we're really making that general direct comparison, let's really unpack the criminal justice system. But we're not talking about that for folks who actually care about when those of us who look like me and look like you, or look like Kalief Browder, as we know, they're not talking about those issues. They're not talking about the injustices that exist that allow people to stay behind bars without ever being convicted of a crime, because it's insincere and we know who they're peddling to.
Yeah, a few years ago, the Department of Justice released a study that said the greatest domestic threat is white supremacists becoming members of law enforcement. The reason why they said this was the greatest domestic threat is because, in fact, these white supremacists are terrorists. And they bring a terrorist ideology to a position of public trust. Now, Mark Levin says that is not a threat in this country. Here's more of what Mark said.
Part of what's going on here is the media and the Democrats and Biden want you to believe that this is part of a white supremacy movement. Neo-Nazis and Klansmen. It's not true. But if it is true, tell us who exactly are the neo-Nazis and the Klansmen. None of us support them, but they use this phrase, white supremacy, to attack our entire society under this critical race theory. And so they move in and out of the language, move in and out of the definitions. It's white supremacists. It's the greatest danger we face in this country, according to Biden. Now, actually, those massive nuclear warheads that are aimed at our major cities by China and Russia, and the ones that Iran wants to get with the support of the Biden administration, that's the greatest threat we face, ladies and gentlemen.
That man is a damn shame, just as a human being. As a human being. On June 5th, the DOJ revealed that approximately 465 defendants had been arrested in connection to the attack, with more than 130 charged with assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers or employees, including 40 suspects who have been charged with using a deadly or dangerous weapon or causing serious bodily injury to an officer. That's just what they did to other police officers. And I guarantee you, these individuals did not act in silos. Listen, I'm flat out of time. We got the bullpen on the other side. Kenya, how can people follow you, sister? It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Sure, they can follow me on everything at Live from Kenya.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on Indisputable. All right, we got more. Stick and stay.
We're very honest that we're progressives. We call the Young Turks home of progressives, and we support progressive candidates.
There has been this reemergence of political activism, especially among young people.
This weekend was the second Women's March, both across the US and across the world. So these people are not simply marching, they're not simply talking, they're also running for office. And when they do run, they're gonna make a difference.
Joe Crowley is congressman from New York. He's very powerful. Why? He raised a lot of money. But there's someone finally challenging him.
We need to have representation that advocates as fiercely for working class people as possible from this seat.
If candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez even get a little bit of media attention outside of what the Young Turks does, they have an excellent chance of winning.
She's gonna win, she's gonna win. 68% reporting.
The majority of Americans want Medicare for all. So I don't care what you and your corporate cronies want. What I care about is what the American people want.
We believe in total change. Everything runs on donor money. And that is what we will fight. And that is exactly why they don't like us.
We're having fun. It's election night.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has defeated Joe Crowley.
Here we go again.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Down goes Crowley. Down goes Crowley. Down goes Manafort. Down goes Cohen. Women came out in record numbers in the primaries. They said you'll be lucky to get one candidate. We now have 12 that have won their primaries. Bezos and Amazon announcing that they are going to go to a 15-hour minimum wage.
We're making progress. Let's keep going.
Many of these women made history.
The biggest victories, all women of color. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, Sharice Davids and Deb Haaland.
And I want to go to Congress because I want to change those things.
I'm calling it. Jamal Bowman has won. Down goes Engel. Down goes Engel.
For a long time, we have not had progressives in power. It's going to be something to behold.
Welcome to Happy Hour, everybody. After a week of soul-crushing news, we break out the good stuff. Good news, good videos, good people, and of course, drink good alcohol. That's the worst thing I've ever had.
This is the best show.
Full disclosure, we did do a shot right before the show began. It says,
let's
flamingo.
Flamingo.
The reason you had trouble with that word is it's not a word.
Okay.
This is the one of everything.
I've got a rash. Could I just put it on that to see if it'll take it off?
What did you used to think this was?
Bull piss.
Drink it, swallow it,
no.
spit it. Oh, that's needed after a day like this. Cheers to Brett Ehrlich. Climax. Uranus smells like farts. Because of course it does. This is the worst sketch ever of a perp. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? They found the guy. This is Sophie's super happy dog story of the week.
This dog is so precious and deserves the world. I'm just not drinking that beer.
Here's my dog. This is Onyx.
Yeah, I would just say that he's exotic because he's not your traditional dog. Still 12 out of 10 because they're all good.
Well, if that made you happy, just wait till you see the best thing ever of the week. There is a woman who moves like a horse.
Why do I want to go home and like try this?
We're actually going to show you the running butthole challenge right now. What's happening? No, that's just wrong. Every way. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, Dave. As you can probably see, Skype froze. Frozen crash.
You know, I'm watching that documentary on the Vietnam War, and there was a TV journalist in the middle of some tiny little village in Vietnam doing live TV as the soldiers were burning the Vietnamese huts, and it didn't crash. And that was 1965, and he was in Vietnam.
Welcome back to Indisputable. We got a lot of viewer comments. Let me read some of them. So thankful for all of the comments. Remember to always join me on Indisputable TYT on YouTube. Subscribe. All right, it's free, it's quick. Follow me on all social media, Indisputable TYT. Okay, let's go to Super Chat. That 01 Cobra says, really enjoying your show, Doctor. Always looking forward to the bullpen speaking the truth. Well, it's coming. Forrest Dudley says, Dr. Richey, can we rechristen you as the Indisputable Dragon next time you're on TDR? Of course you can. And I've been called so much worse than that. That is a privilege. I would love for you to rechristen me. All right, KFZ247 says, Brother Pence might as well hang it up. Yeah, he had a previous career as a broadcaster. He was a radio personality. He may want to go back to that. Stephen Miles Cook says, the Karenacity. That is a good one. Yes. Osiris XTV says, how can people be so mad? LOL. Hybrid Vigor. Her finger pointing is the scariest force on earth. Laughing my. Vitingale says, for the bullpen, thumbs up. Thank you. Dragon Penny, let's go to Twitch. Dragon Penny gifted 5 tier 1 subs. Kenny from Philly gifted 5 tier 1 subs. Thank you. Kenny from Philly resubscribed. 13 months, still going strong. And Elder Mind Pulse has resubscribed, tier 1 for 6 months. Thank you. Tempo Dan 918. Wow, her arms turned red. She was yelling so much. Yeah. Okay. Crix AK, I don't know, Krizak maybe. Imagine a world where we all were like Dr. Richey. One can dream. Well, damn, that's a high compliment. I don't know if that will be a great world, but it would definitely be an interesting one. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what just happened. Okay.
Well, hang on, we're gonna reconnect really quick. We gotta start the call over, go to Slate Skip.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had a slight technical issue. Welcome to the bullpen. On the bullpen today, I have Benji Backer, president and founder of the Conservative Coalition. Now, I must say this guy is a real mixed bag because he's pro-environment and a conservative, and we're going to talk about all of that. Benji, good day, welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. And I love being described as a mixed bag.
Well, you know you are, and I actually appreciate that because I think politics works best when there's nuance. And what we have seen in both parties is this moving away from nuance to this tribalism of corporate politics on both sides. So let's talk about something we agree with. We actually agree on environmental justice. So I want you to give me your environmental justice stance And let's chop it up and see exactly where we agree and where we differ.
Well, absolutely. And first, let me explain this. Almost every American is a mixed bag, even if we don't give ourselves credit for it. We have way more convoluted and different views than what the Republican and Democratic party system would make us think. We don't always have overlap with one party or another. And that's why I see myself as more conservative, but I also have views that are seen as quote unquote liberal. And I think most people either fall one way or the other in that category. On the environment, environmental justice, I do believe that environmental issues disproportionately impact those who are in low income and minority communities. It's the hardest hit communities, and those communities aren't able to adapt as easily to the issues of climate change and other environmental degradation. So I think as a society, what we need to do is make sure that in our policies, environmental justice is always part of how we move forward on environmental issues. If we are going to change a sector of the economy in an area where environmental justice is a really big problem, how can the low income people be a part of that conversation? How can we train them and make sure that they're ready for the workforce in that new sector that's being created if there is a transformation? So I actually don't know if there would be a ton of disagreement there. And I think that as a younger conservative leaning person, a lot of my peers would agree.
Let's talk about it. It's beautiful what you just said, and I appreciate you saying that. Let's talk about the reality of the politics involved. I agree with you 100%, and I've been saying this for years. The reason why we, especially in the Black community, the reason why we should look at environmental justice as also civil justice is because of what you just described. It actually impacts our communities quicker. And the impact is even more severe. And we have seen this happen over and over again, from the city of Flint to environmental issues happening in urban communities without any real remedy. But Republicans, your colleagues, are typically the ones who are antithetical to legislation that would really take this issue seriously. So let's go to the Green New Deal. That was massive. That was a massive idea, right? What were your thoughts about the Green New Deal?
Well, look, the Green New Deal might sound good, but it is simply just an idea. There is no policy substance behind it. There are only goals and aspirations. There's not an actual path of getting there. The reality is environmental issues, specifically climate change, which the Green New Deal is supposed to tackle, is a global issue. We need all countries involved. We need all industries involved. We need all individuals involved. The Green New Deal doesn't include the rest of the world. There's nothing that is replicable in the Green New Deal to other countries. And on top of that, it's not feasible here in the United States because there's no policy behind it. There's nothing that you can actually pass to make a difference on it. And on top of that, the limited policy that they do have, which is basically mandating 100% wind and solar, isn't possible. It isn't something that we can do here in the short term. And right now, it doesn't seem like it's something that we can do in the long term as well. We need to be having a conversation about all energy sectors. We need to be having a conversation that includes local government, state government, the federal government, and companies. And it just doesn't do that. It's very one size fits all or nothing, boom or bust. And we can't have that if we're hoping to fight climate change.
Let me tell you why I disagree with you fundamentally. I definitely understand your point of view about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is what we call a political framework, where it lays out agenda, it lays out a goal, and it goes full throttle. Here's what that means. They are asking for 100%. They're saying these are the conclusions. These are the outcomes that we can achieve, right? So maybe you don't agree with the full outcome. Maybe you don't agree with 100% wind or solar, et cetera. That's fine. You don't agree with that outcome. But maybe you agree with 75% of it. Maybe you agree with 60% of it. And I think what has happened in this conversation about the Green New Deal has not been genuine across the political aisle. And I know you're a smart guy, so I want you to understand it from a different context. The Green New Deal is not a policy. You are correct. A policy is a social contract between the community and government, codified in statutory language, typically known as legislation. That is not what it is. The Green New Deal is a framework piece. And that framework did exactly what it was supposed to do. It got you talking about it. It got me talking about it. It got Republicans talking about it. It got Democrats talking about it. And because of that framework, you have more conversation around environmental change and environmental justice than ever before. But it took a massive framework like the Green New Deal to spark that dialogue. But what has happened, brother, is that many on your side of the aisle decided not to be genuine about the conversation of climate change and denied the actual science connected to climate change. And that's one thing the Green New Deal does. It adheres to and respects the science that's well established about climate change, while people on your side of the aisle, brother, they say the science is not settled.
Well, I have to completely disagree with that. First, with your explanation, that does make sense. I mean, look, we are talking about the Green New Deal, and that means that we're talking about climate change. But talking isn't good enough. We need to be starting to take steps in the right direction to fight climate change and actually acting, not just talking about it. There have been over 24 bipartisan climate policies in Congress over the past couple of years. AOC and the other Green New Deal folks have not gotten onto one of them. They haven't gotten onto any of them because they said they don't go far enough. Well, the reality is inaction is the least amount of action that you can get, and steps in the right direction on bipartisan policies that are sensible is at least a step in the right direction.
Okay, let's talk about that.
There are Republicans in Congress who have their own climate plans, who have passed the biggest investment in climate change policy of all time in December that we don't talk about. And that's a legacy that is starting to be created.
Let's talk about what we know of the Republican Party. We know that you just talked about the globalized nature of climate change and how we have to be part of a global infrastructure. I agree with you. But your Republican president said we do not need to be part of that global infrastructure. And then somehow he got those same Republicans who voted on some climate justice bills to agree that we did not need to be part of a global conversation or be part of a global remedy or global solution as it relates to climate change. Don't you find that to be politically schizophrenic when you have one policy saying we need to be part of a dynamic solution in a global context, and then you have the leader of your party saying we do not?
Well, first of all, the leader of the Republican Party for the past 4 years is one person. There are hundreds of elected federal Republicans and thousands of elected state-wide Republicans, and even more at the local level. Those folks have been leading on climate change over the past 4 or 5 years because of our organization, the Conservation Coalition. That is progress. And despite what the president says, and despite what he peddled in some of the debates and that sort of thing, emissions continue to fall.
Now, are you talking about the current president or Donald Trump?
I'm talking about Donald Trump. He talked about how climate change wasn't.
We really, let me just say this, brother, for the sake of the show. Because of the rhetoric around him, let's refer to him as former president, because he still thinks he's the president, and a whole lot of Republicans still think he's the president. So thank you. Okay.
The former president, who talked a lot about how climate change wasn't real, did a lot of damage to the Republican Party's legacy on climate change for the past 4 or 5 years. But I don't think that should overshadow the hundreds of Republicans who aren't Donald Trump, who have been leading on climate change over the past 4 or 5 years. There has been an immense movement within the conservative movement. And on top of that, I don't have a problem with the United States seeing the Paris Accords as not a great answer. The reality is a lot of scientists who are climate scientists on the IPCC and UN advisory committees also don't agree the Paris Agreement does absolutely anything to further the climate change conversation. So I don't think that we should be basing whether or not conservatives are going in the right direction based off of one person or one international agreement that doesn't do anything to lower emissions.
Let me tell you why I disagree with that. Donald Trump, while he's one man, represented the most powerful seat in the land. So you do have to consider what his policy agenda was. That former president took y'all back, brother. I mean, let's just be authentic about it. Can you say right here on my show that former President Donald Trump took y'all back? And I'm talking about people like you who actually know, listen, we need to take care of the planet. We're Republicans still, we're conservatives, but we still need to take care of the planet. would you not say boldly, listen, that man took us back on that idea?
I would say that while he refused to take action on climate change, the rest of the conservative movement continued to go forward. Like I said, there were dozens of Republicans who passed climate policies during his time as president. So I don't like to focus on one person.
Did Trump sign them into law?
In federalism.
I believe in Trump signed them into law. I got you. Did Trump sign them into law?
He absolutely did.
He signed all of those pieces of legislation into law.
He signed the ones that were passed into law.
Okay, so if he signed all of those pieces of legislation into law, and we still have you all being slow to the table as it relates to environmental justice, then one would argue that what was passed into law was really a watered down version of environmental justice and not the true environmental justice that you were looking for.
Well, look, I mean, change doesn't happen overnight. These were steps taken in the right direction just 6 months ago. I mean, the biggest investment of climate change technology in US history was passed in late December 2020. I mean, we're just seeing the first inklings of this bill in real life right now. But the reality is, environmental justice is not a partisan issue. Conservatives, liberals, old people, young people overwhelmingly agree that environmental justice is something we need to tackle. And despite what the former president says about climate change, it really is irrelevant at this point because there are conservatives in Congress, in state legislatures, people like me leading the charge, thousands of our activists who are pushing for environmental action across the country. And yet we're still talking about Donald Trump. Instead of talking about how we can solve climate change, which is a very important conversation that we must have, I'm on this show talking about a former president. And the reality is we need to be looking forward. We need to stop looking back. We need to stop saying, oh, well, there were 30 years ago, conservatives denied climate change in a way that was really abysmal. And then you had a president 4 years ago. Like, no, we're in 2021 and there are Republicans and Democrats who want to pass climate policies. Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about 2021. A recent poll that was done showed that roughly 15% of Republicans believe that climate change or the issue of the climate is a major issue in America. Compare that to roughly 85% of Democrats. Now, they didn't come to that conclusion on their own. And this is why I want you to realize how important it is that your leaders are in unison with your agenda. That 15% was a drop from 32% before Trump ever became president. Before Trump became president, 4 years before that, it was closer to 48%. So literally, Republicans have been going the wrong way. And I'm not talking about the leadership class, brother. I'm talking about people who vote for Republicans. Now, you don't think that they have been influenced in the opposite direction of the education that you're speaking of by the same leaders that you're defending on the show?
Well, look, there are two problems that exist within the conservative movement right now when it comes to fighting climate change. The first is that there is a huge generational divide. Younger conservatives prioritize this issue far more than their elders, and over 90% of young conservatives want action on climate change. That's the generation that I'm a part of. I'm actually an old Gen Zer, as surprising as that might seem. And Donald Trump did put the party back in a way on climate change because of what you just talked about, a decreased involvement in the climate change conversation, particularly with older Americans. But what also contributed to that was something like the Green New Deal, which comes out as an assault on people who live in middle America, who work in industries that would be directly impacted by the Green New Deal. And they're basically told, oh, well, you should just figure it out and get a new job. And we don't really care about it. We're just people from New York and Boston and Seattle, where I live, and San Francisco. And we're going to tell you what to do in the middle of the country on behalf of climate change. Of course, they're not going to want to engage on climate change. So it's really twofold. Having a president that talks about it as a hoax is a problem, but so is a radical policy that doesn't include the majority of this country in terms of geography.
See, Benji, you don't get to do that, brother. You just said it was not a policy, and now you're citing it as a policy on the same show. You just proclaim it is not a policy.
They claim it as a policy.
But it is, sir, it is a framework. It is a political framework. We have established that. You have acknowledged that. You said it was not a policy in the beginning of the show. You can't now claim that it's a policy when it fits your argument or narrative. So let's be authentic.
I said it came across. I said it came across to those people as a policy that goes against their values, and that's how it's billed. It's not billed as a framework. It's billed as a policy. It's not a policy, but it's billed as one. And there are people in the middle of this country who feel incredibly attacked by this one-size-fits-all quote-unquote policy that is supposedly supposed to fight climate change, but also take away their livelihoods, which is what it would do if it was pursued.
If it was pursued, let's talk about the Green New Deal for a moment, then I'll go to something else. If it was pursued, definitely you would have to be thoughtful about implementation. And nobody said this could be implemented overnight. As a matter of fact, those that support it even say it will not be implemented overnight. It would have to be implemented by way of process. And you already know this. Many Democrats, especially corporate Democrats, they were adversarial to the Green New Deal. They decided to distance themselves from the Green New Deal, which I thought was a mistake. I still think it was a mistake because there were elements in the Green New Deal that should have been talked about on a more mainstream level, because without the conversation, you never spark the innovation necessary to get us to the space of environmental justice, real environmental justice. If you do not have a hardcore, no compromise attitude about environmental justice, you know what's going to happen, Benji? Corporate players who have won time and time again the argument of environmental justice, those corporate entities will continue to win at the end of the day. You know and I know the fight for environmental justice is not just a political one, but it is a fight against corporate interest, right?
I would say that if you believe in fighting for environmental justice, as I do, then the last thing that you should be supporting is the Green New Deal. Because the Green New Deal will not happen. There's no policy within the Green New Deal framework that has been actually pursued. It is simply a framework. It's been a framework for multiple years. And if you want environmental justice to be solved in this country, you put forth policies that actually move us forward.
All right,
and not frameworks that are just a divisive piece of rhetoric to win political points.
Come on now, wait a minute.
That's what it is.
You literally in this conversation have already agreed with some of the dynamics codified inside of the Green New Deal. You have agreed.
It doesn't matter when there's no progress being made under the guise of the Green New Deal.
The conversation of truth always matters, even if most people do not see it on your side of the aisle. I expect you to be an individual who can look at the nuance of the Green New Deal and say, these are areas where we actually agree.
But
these are dynamics that we agree.
There's no nuance within the Green New Deal.
Do you agree?
There's no nuance.
Okay, I ask you a question. Do you agree that we need more solar and wind energy in the United States? Do you agree with that concept or not?
Yes, I do.
That's in the Green New Deal.
No, because there's no nuance in the Green New Deal. It is just a bunch of ideas.
You get my point. That's in the Green New Deal. That is a point of agreement. And the only reason why you oppose it, Benji, is because it has been politicized so much that it becomes, the word becomes this great evil to where you don't cite any of the language of the Green New Deal. You just say Green New Deal. Green New Deal.
I oppose the Green New Deal because there has been no progress made on the Green New Deal at all since it was introduced. They keep reintroducing. Are you gonna let me finish a point, or
sure.
You keep shutting me down?
We got a couple of minutes. The conservative climate change movement. Explain that.
Well, look, I believe in climate action, not climate rhetoric. And the Green New Deal is climate rhetoric. And the conservative climate change movement is there to provide actionable results with whoever on the left wants to be a part of it. We've been building a grassroots movement across this country of mostly young conservatives who believe in climate change and want to take action. And we've been working with left of center groups to make actual policies pass. And we've actually gotten stuff done since we've launched.
Yeah, and just so you know, the Green New Deal, elements of that Green New Deal have been adopted by major city mayors like Mayor of Atlanta, LA, New York. It has also been adopted by various states, elements of the Green New Deal, and they have actually given the Green New Deal credit for adopting that. So when you say that no policy has come out of it, out of this framework that is simply incorrect. While we are slow on the legislative side federally, there has been an adoption of the policy in multiple jurisdictions across the United States. Benji, I'm flat out of time. My producers are telling me to wrap it up. Brother, it's been fun. I appreciate you coming on the show. And tell people how they can follow you, man.
All right, well, I appreciate having the opportunity. Always good for a lively dialogue. We need more of it. I'm at Benji Backer on Instagram and Twitter. Hope to be on again and hope to have more of these conversations in the future. That's what we need.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you being on Indisputable. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and take care of the planet. And remember, the truth is always indisputable.